Chapter 7: The Easter Ball. Bradley's hand rested at the small of Kendra's back as they paused at the entrance to the town hall. Transformed for the Easter ball, the utilitarian building now glowed with the light of 100 oil lamps and colorful spring bunting draped from every rafter. The scent of lilacs and fresh beeswax mingled with ladies' perfumes and the occasional whiff of tobacco from gentlemen stepping outside for a smoke. "Ready?" Bradley asked, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Kendra drew a steadying breath, acutely conscious of the hastily mended gown beneath her wrap. Though Josephine and Mrs. Winters had worked miracles with needle and thread, she knew the repairs wouldn't withstand close scrutiny. But in the golden lamplight, perhaps no one would notice. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, summoning a smile she didn't entirely feel. Bradley's dark eyes warmed as he studied her face. "You look beautiful, Kendra, like springtime itself." The simple compliment steadied her more than any elaborate flattery could have. This was Bradley, her Bradley, not the wealthy mine owner or Boston society's prodigal son, and for this night at least, he had chosen her above all others. With that thought anchoring her, Kendra placed her hand on his offered arm and stepped with him into the glittering throng. The orchestra, positioned on a small raised platform at the far end of the hall, was midway through a lively country dance. Couples whirled across the polished floor, ladies' skirts blooming like flowers in a spring breeze. Along the walls, Redstone Ridge's prominent citizens gathered in clusters of animated conversation that faltered noticeably as Bradley and Kendra entered. "Is that? Morgan brought his cook!" The nerve of some people. Handsome couple, though, you must admit. The whispers swirled around them, undisguised in the sudden lull of conversation that their appearance had caused. Bradley, either oblivious or purposefully ignoring the stir, guided Kendra further into the hall with the confidence of a man who knew his position was unassailable. "Bradley, there you are." Henry Winchester detached himself from a group of distinguished-looking gentlemen, approaching with a glass of punch in one hand and a calculating smile. "We were just discussing tomorrow's meeting. And who is your lovely companion?" The moment of truth had arrived sooner than Kendra expected. She steeled herself for Bradley's response, for the inevitable questions about her background that would follow. "Henry, may I present Miss Kendra Tompkins?" Bradley's voice carried clearly, betraying not a hint of apology or qualification. "Miss Tompkins, Henry Winchester, my principal investor from Denver." Winchester's eyebrows rose fractionally, the only indication of his surprise at the introduction. "Miss Tompkins, a pleasure. I believe I saw you at church this morning with the Morgan family?" "Mr. Winchester." Kendra extended her gloved hand with a grace Josephine had hastily coached her on before they left the mansion. "Bradley speaks highly of your business acumen." "Does he indeed?" Winchester's assessing gaze moved between them, noting Bradley's use of her given name and the protective way he maintained contact with her elbow. "How interesting. I find most ladies' eyes glaze over at the mere mention of silver processing methods." "Miss Tompkins is not most ladies," Bradley replied smoothly. "Her practical intelligence makes her an excellent sounding board for ideas others might find unconventional." The subtle reference to Winchester's skepticism about the new processing method was not lost on the investor, whose smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Quite. Well, I look forward to our discussions tomorrow, Bradley. 8 o'clock sharp?" "I'll be there," Bradley nodded, then guided Kendra away with a gentle pressure at her waist. "Ready to face the lion's den?" he murmured once they were beyond Winchester's hearing. "That wasn't so terrible," Kendra admitted, relaxing slightly, "though I suspect Mr. Winchester was more alarmed by my presence than he let on. Winchester's a businessman to the core. He'll reserve judgment until he determines whether you're an asset or liability to my operations." Bradley's mouth quirked in that half-smile she'd come to cherish. Let him wonder a while longer. As they moved through the crowd, Bradley introduced Kendra to what seemed like half of Redstone Ridge's population. Merchants who supplied the mine, the bank president and his wife, the newspaper editor, even the crusty old assayer who determined the purity of silver ingots before shipping. To each, Bradley presented her simply as Miss Tompkins, offering no explanation for her presence at his side, yet making it undeniably clear she was there by his choice and with his full approval. Most responded with the polite reserve of people uncertain how to categorize this unexpected development. A few, particularly older matrons and the wives of Eastern investors, reacted with barely concealed disapproval. But to Kendra's surprise, several greeted her with genuine warmth, most notably Sheriff Taylor and his plump, motherly wife. "About time Bradley brought someone who can make him smile," Mrs. Taylor declared, patting Kendra's hand. "You look lovely, my dear. That shade of lilac suits you perfectly." "Thank you," Kendra replied, touched by the simple kindness. "It's my first ball. I fear I'm not quite prepared for all this." She gestured at the glittering assembly. "Nonsense." Mrs. Taylor waved away her concern. "You've more natural grace than half these society ladies who learned deportment from books. Just be yourself." That's clearly what Bradley values. Before Kendra could respond to this surprisingly insightful observation, the orchestra struck up a new tune, the opening strains of a waltz. Bradley's hand tightened slightly on hers. "I believe this is our dance," he said, his eyes alight with an anticipation that sent warmth flooding through her. "I should warn you, I've never waltzed before," Kendra admitted as he led her toward the dance floor. "At town socials, we usually just do the Virginia reel or simple country dances. Then I shall have the pleasure of teaching you." Bradley's voice dropped to that intimate tone that seemed to create a private world for just the two of them. "Trust me and follow my lead. The rest will come naturally." As they took their places among the other couples, Kendra noticed Martha and Cecilia entering the hall, their timing suspiciously perfect for maximum observation of the coming dance. Martha wore deep burgundy that emphasized her regal bearing, while Cecilia's sky blue gown set off her golden curls to perfection. Both women's gazes locked immediately on Bradley and Kendra at the center of the dance floor. "Your sisters have arrived," Kendra murmured, tension returning to her shoulders. "Let them watch," Bradley replied, his hands settling at her waist as the first true measures of the waltz began. "I intend to give them quite a show." With that declaration, he swept her into the dance with such fluid confidence that Kendra had no choice but to follow. After a few tentative steps, she found the rhythm of the waltz opening before her like a book whose language she suddenly understood. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, her body falling naturally into the pattern as Bradley guided her with subtle pressure and the steady certainty of his frame. "See," he said as they completed their first full turn, "you're a natural." "I have an excellent teacher," Kendra replied, surprised to find herself smiling genuinely now, the joy of movement and music temporarily eclipsing her anxiety. They moved together with an ease that defied their short acquaintance, as if they had been dancing partners for years rather than minutes. Bradley led with the same quiet authority he displayed at the mine, anticipating her movements and gently guiding her through the more complex turns. Kendra followed his lead with growing confidence, her skirts swirling around them in a lilac cloud. "Everyone is watching us," she noted as they swept past a cluster of wide-eyed observers. "Let them," Bradley repeated, a hint of defiance in his tone. "Let them see what I see. A woman of grace and beauty who makes every other woman here pale in comparison." The naked admiration in his gaze stole Kendra's breath more effectively than the dance's exertion. "You shouldn't say such things," she protested weakly. "Why not? Because they're improper or because they're true?" Bradley executed a perfect turn, bringing them momentarily closer together. "I've spent 3 years conforming to others' expectations, Kendra. Tonight, I'm following my own heart." The implication of his words hung between them, thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. Kendra was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, of the scant inches separating their bodies as they moved in perfect synchronization across the floor. Whatever grew between them transcended mere physical attraction or social rebellion. It was a recognition, soul to soul, that defied easy categorization. As the final measures of the waltz approached, Bradley slowed their pace slightly, his eyes holding hers with unmistakable intent. "When the music ends," he said softly, "I'd like to show you the gardens behind the hall. The spring flowers are quite beautiful in the moonlight. Private conversation away from prying ears and judging eyes. Exactly what Kendra needed to reveal her deception before Martha or Cecilia could use it as a weapon, yet the prospect filled her with dread. Would this be the last dance they shared before the truth destroyed whatever was growing between them? Before she could respond, the waltz ended with a flourish from the violins. Bradley reluctantly released her waist but maintained his hold on her hand as they acknowledged the end of the dance with a bow and curtsy. "Bradley, darling," Cecilia materialized beside them, a vision in blue silk and calculated interruption. "You promised me the next dance, remember? Something about discussing the Winterlake property before tomorrow's meeting?" Her smile held poisonous triumph as she glanced at Kendra. "I'm sure Miss Tompkins won't mind relinquishing you for one dance. After all, a hostess must make her guests feel welcome." The deliberate reminder of Kendra's status as an employee rather than a guest struck its intended target. Bradley's jaw tightened visibly, but before he could respond, another voice joined the conversation. "Miss Tompkins, I wonder if I might claim this dance?" Albert Clark, the Redstone Ridge banker, appeared at Kendra's elbow, his expression inscrutable beneath his neatly trimmed beard. "I've been hoping for an opportunity to compliment you on the remarkable change in Bradley since you joined his household." The unexpected request from a man of Clark's standing momentarily silenced Cecilia. Bradley hesitated, clearly torn between refusing to relinquish Kendra and causing a scene that would only draw more attention to her precarious social position. "It seems we both have obligations to our guests," Kendra said smoothly, making the decision for him. "I would be honored, Mr. Clark." Relief and frustration warred in Bradley's expression, but he recognized the wisdom of her choice. "The next waltz is mine," he murmured, pressing her hand briefly before allowing Cecilia to lead him away. As Clark guided her into the lively country dance now beginning, Kendra caught Martha's satisfied smirk from across the room. The elder Morgan sister stood with Mrs. Winchester and several other society matrons, all watching the separation of Bradley and Kendra with evident approval. "Don't let them intimidate you," Clark advised, surprising Kendra with his perception. The Morgans have always believed they stood above the ordinary rules of Redstone Ridge. "You've known the family long?" Kendra asked, grateful for the distraction as they joined hands and circled left with the other dancers. "Since Jonathan Morgan first arrived with dreams of silver in his eyes and not a penny to his name." Clark executed a neat turn, bringing them face to face again. "I was just a junior clerk at the bank then, watching my superiors laugh him out the door when he requested a loan." The dance separated them briefly as they clapped in rhythm with the other participants, then rejoined. "They weren't laughing when he struck the first vein," Clark continued. "Suddenly, everyone wanted to be Jonathan Morgan's friend and financial advisor." "Including you?" Kendra asked with more directness than she'd intended. Clark's bark of laughter held genuine amusement. "Direct, aren't you? Yes, including me. I made my career on the Morgan Silver Strikes, I won't deny it. But unlike some, I never forgot that Jonathan was a man, not a walking bank vault." The dance brought them together again, allowing Clark to lower his voice. Bradley's much like his father in that way. He values honesty over flattery, substance over show. It's why his investors from Denver find him so difficult to manage. This unexpected insight into Bradley surprised Kendra. "Yet you continue to support his ventures, even the controversial new processing method." "I believe in his vision even when it seems unconventional." Clark studied her face as they moved through the pattern of the dance. "As I think do you." Before Kendra could formulate a response to this perceptive observation, the dance ended with a flourish. Clark bowed over her hand with unexpected gallantry. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Tompkins. If I might offer a word of advice?" Kendra nodded, curious despite herself. "Whatever secrets you're holding, and we all have them, Bradley Morgan values truth above all else. Offer him that, and you might be surprised by his response." With that cryptic parting, Clark melted back into the crowd, leaving Kendra momentarily alone at the edge of the dance floor. She scanned the room for Bradley, finding him still engaged with Cecilia, his expression politely attentive, though his gaze kept straying toward Kendra. Well, well, Joseph Tompkins' daughter, dancing with bankers and mine owners, your father would be spinning in his grave." The cultured voice with its edge of mockery froze Kendra in place. She turned slowly to find Eleanor Harrington standing beside her, resplendent in emerald silk that highlighted her remarkable blue eyes. Up close, Kendra could see the fine lines around those eyes that hadn't been visible during their brief encounter at the Mercantile. Lines that spoke of disappointment rather than laughter. "Mrs. Harrington, I didn't realize you were still in town." Kendra fought to keep her voice steady, aware that they had become the focus of curious glances from nearby guests. "My husband's business required an extended stay." Eleanor's gaze moved deliberately to Bradley and Cecilia, now concluding their dance. "Though I confess, the unexpected entertainment has made the delay quite worthwhile. Bradley and his cook, who could have imagined such a delicious scandal?" The deliberate emphasis on cook reinforced Kendra's precarious position, straddling two worlds that were never meant to intersect. "If you'll excuse me," she said stiffly, unwilling to provide further amusement to this woman who had once broken Bradley's heart. "He'll tire of you, you know." Eleanor's words, soft as a snake's hiss, stopped Kendra mid-step. Bradley has always been drawn to novelty and challenge. The untutored cook with her frontier honesty makes a charming diversion after Boston debutantes, but it won't last. It can't. The barb struck deeper than Kendra wanted to admit. "Perhaps you're right," she replied with quiet dignity. "But at least I won't abandon him for a wealthier prospect when the novelty fades." Eleanor's perfect features hardened into a mask of affronted pride. "You know nothing of my reasons." "I know enough." Kendra straightened her shoulders, channeling her father's stubborn courage. "I know Martha convinced you that Bradley would be better off without you, that you weren't suitable for the Morgan name and future." The blood drained from Eleanor's face, leaving her complexion nearly as pale as her knuckles where they gripped her dance card. "Who told you that? Does it matter? What matters is that you believed her, believed Bradley's happiness lay in your sacrifice rather than in his own choice." Kendra softened her tone, seeing the genuine pain beneath Eleanor's brittle exterior. "If you truly loved him, how could you make that decision for him rather than with him?" For a moment, Eleanor's careful facade cracked, revealing the wounded woman beneath. "You don't understand. Martha said whatever served her own purposes," Kendra interrupted gently, "as she continues to do now." Eleanor's gaze moved past Kendra, focusing on something or someone across the room. Her expression shifted from vulnerability back to polished disdain so quickly that Kendra might have imagined the brief glimpse of her true feelings. "Well, speak of the devil," Eleanor murmured. "It seems the Morgan sisters have some announcement to make. I do hope you're prepared for whatever comes next, Miss Tompkins." Kendra turned to see Martha and Cecilia approaching Bradley with the determined air of women executing a carefully planned strategy. Josephine followed in their wake, her expression a mixture of frustration and alarm. Too late, Kendra realized she had missed her opportunity to speak privately with Bradley before Martha implemented whatever scheme she and Cecilia had concocted. "It appears our intermission is over and the main performance about to begin," Eleanor commented with the detached interest of a theater patron anticipating a dramatic final act. "Do let me know how it ends, won't you?" With a rustle of expensive silk, she glided away, leaving Kendra alone to face whatever storm Martha and Cecilia were about to unleash. The orchestra chose that moment to strike up another waltz, the one Bradley had claimed as theirs. Across the crowded room, his eyes found hers, warm with promise and oblivious to the approaching danger. He disengaged from Cecilia's clinging hand and started toward Kendra, his expression lighting with the smile he seemed to reserve for her alone. In that moment, watching him approach through the swirl of dancers, Kendra made her decision. She would tell him everything. About the whistling kettle, about her embellished credentials, about her initial desperation and the unexpected feelings that had grown in its place. She would offer him the truth Clark had advised was so essential, and face whatever consequences followed. But first she would have this dance, this perfect waltz with the man who had seen beyond her station to the woman within. Whatever came after, she would hold this memory of Bradley Morgan crossing a crowded ballroom to claim a dance with the woman who had, against all odds and expectations, captured his heart. Even if once the truth was known, that heart might be forever lost to her. Bradley's hand settled at Kendra's waist with the same gentle authority that had guided her through their first waltz. The orchestra played a slower melody now, allowing couples to converse as they moved across the polished floor. "I was beginning to think I'd never reclaim you," Bradley murmured, his eyes warm as they swept over her face. "Every man in Redstone Ridge seems determined to monopolize your attention tonight." "Hardly that," Kendra demurred, though she couldn't help the pleased flush that warmed her cheeks. "I think they're simply curious about the woman who persuaded Bradley Morgan to attend a social function without obvious coercion." His laugh, rich and unguarded, drew glances from nearby dancers. "Is that my reputation? The reluctant recluse of Redstone Ridge?" "Something like that." Kendra allowed herself to relax into the dance, savoring what might be their final moments of uncomplicated connection. Soon, she would have to tell him everything. But not yet. Not while his eyes held that rare light of genuine happiness. "Well, they're half right," Bradley admitted as he guided her through a graceful turn. "I've avoided these gatherings whenever possible. Until now, I saw little purpose in them beyond Martha's social ambitions." "And now?" Kendra couldn't resist asking, even knowing the dangerous territory they approached. Bradley's gaze held hers with an intensity that made her heart stumble against her ribs. "Now, I understand the appeal of holding a beautiful woman in my arms, while the rest of the world fades into insignificance." The simple declaration, delivered without artifice or calculation, stole Kendra's breath more effectively than the dance's exertion. Before she could formulate a response, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. Eleanor Harrington stood framed in the doorway, her emerald gown gleaming under the lamplight. This time, however, she was not alone. A distinguished gentleman with silver-streaked dark hair and the unmistakable bearing of wealth stood beside her, his hand possessively at her elbow. "Richard Harrington," Bradley identified him, his voice suddenly flat, "Eleanor's husband and my chief competitor for the Silverton property." Kendra felt his frame stiffen subtly, though his steps never faltered. "I didn't realize they were attending the ball. She mentioned her husband had business in Denver. Apparently his business brought him to Redstone Ridge instead." Bradley's jaw tightened as he watched the Harringtons make their entrance, the crowd parting before them like water around the prow of an elegant ship. "Interesting timing, given tomorrow's meeting with the investors." Before Kendra could respond, Martha appeared at the edge of the dance floor, her face alight with a satisfaction that sent warning bells clanging in Kendra's mind. Beside her stood Cecilia, her perfect lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. "Bradley," Martha called, pitching her voice to Carrie without appearing to shout. "The Harringtons have arrived. Surely you'll want to greet them properly." The pointed reminder of social obligation was delivered with exquisite timing, interrupting the waltz at its midpoint when refusal would seem churlish rather than merely preoccupied. Bradley's expression darkened, but years of ingrained courtesy prevailed. "It seems we must make an appearance," he said to Kendra, regret evident in his tone. "Though I'd much rather continue our dance." "Of course," Kendra agreed, her stomach tightening with apprehension as Bradley guided her off the dance floor toward the waiting group. Eleanor offered her gloved hand to Bradley with practiced grace, as if their history were nothing more significant than a casual acquaintance. "Bradley, darling, how well you look." "Redstone Ridge clearly agrees with you, Eleanor." "Richard." Bradley's nod was coolly polite. "What brings you to our Easter ball? I understood your business interests were focused in Denver these days." Richard Harrington, taller than Bradley by several inches, but lacking his athletic build, smiled with the confidence of a man accustomed to controlling any room he entered. "The Western Consolidated merger has implications for all mining operations in the territory. When I heard Winchester and his associates would be gathering here, I thought it prudent to join the discussions." "How fortunate that Ellen could accompany you," Martha interjected smoothly, using Eleanor's formal name with deliberate emphasis. "We've so missed her refinement in Redstone Ridge's social circles." Eleanor's smile thinned almost imperceptibly. "Indeed. Though I see Bradley has found interesting company in my absence." Her gaze swept over Kendra with the casual assessment one might give a servant. "Won't you introduce us, Bradley?" A muscle ticked in Bradley's jaw, but his voice remained steady. "Miss Kendra Tompkins, Mrs. Eleanor Harrington and her husband, Richard." Kendra cursed slightly, feeling painfully conscious of her borrowed finery and hastily arranged hair. "Mrs. Harrington." "Miss Tompkins." Richard Harrington's gaze held more genuine interest than his wife's dismissive glance. "Tompkins, any relation to Joseph Tompkins, who opposed the water rights acquisition some years back?" "My father, sir," Kendra acknowledged, her chin lifting slightly despite her misgivings. "Interesting." Harrington's shrewd eyes moved between her and Bradley. "He was a formidable opponent, as I recall. Jonathan Morgan underestimated him rather badly." "A common mistake," Bradley said quietly, his hand coming to rest at the small of Kendra's back in a gesture of silent support. "Underestimating the Tompkins family?" The subtle declaration of allegiance was not lost on anyone in the circle. Martha's lips compressed into a bloodless line, while Eleanor's eyes widened fractionally in genuine surprise. Cecilia broke the momentary silence with a silvery laugh. "How democratic of you, Bradley. Though I confess I'm curious." She turned to Kendra with the practiced smile of a predator closing in on wounded prey. "Miss Tompkins was telling us earlier about her extensive experience cooking for the territorial governor in Santa Fe. Such fascinating work that must have been. Do tell us more about it." The deliberate trap sprung open before Kendra like a yawning chasm. Martha's earlier investigations had obviously revealed the falsity of this claim, and now Cecilia meant to expose the lie publicly, ensuring maximum humiliation for both Kendra and Bradley. Kendra began, her mind racing for some response that might salvage the situation without compounding her deception. "Miss Tompkins." A heavy-set man with a prospector's weathered complexion pushed through the elegant circle, his face alight with recognition. "I thought it was you. Didn't recognize you, all dressed up fancy-like." Kendra's heart sank as she identified Hiram Perkins, a regular customer at the Whistling Kettle and one of her father's oldest friends. "Mr. Perkins, how nice to see you." "When were you reopening the kettle?" Perkins asked, oblivious to the tension surrounding him. "Town ain't been the same without your chicken and dumplings. My Mary says no one makes them like you do. Learned from your ma, I expect." The silence that fell over the group held the breathless quality of spectators witnessing an impending disaster. Kendra felt Bradley stiffen beside her, his hand falling away from her back as the implications of Perkins's words registered. "The Whistling Kettle?" he repeated, his voice carefully controlled. "Kendra, what is he talking about?" Cecilia's triumphant smile widened. "Oh my, hasn't she told you? The Whistling Kettle is, or rather was, a small eatery in town, quite common fare, I understand. Miners and townspeople rather than territorial governors." "Is this true?" Bradley asked, his dark eyes searching Kendra's face with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to meet his gaze, knowing she owed him that much honesty at least. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "The Whistling Kettle belongs to my family. My parents built it, and after they died, my brother and I continued operating it until recently." "Recently meaning until financial difficulties forced its closure," Martha added with surgical precision. "Difficulties that made the position in your household particularly attractive." Perkins, finally sensing the undercurrents, backed away with a mumbled apology. The elegant circle closed ranks again, with Kendra at its center like a specimen under examination. "You never cooked for the governor of New Mexico Territory," Bradley stated, each word measured and controlled. It wasn't a question, but Kendra answered anyway. "No. I assisted with a campaign dinner once, but it was here in Colorado. Many women contributed dishes." "I see." Two simple words delivered with such contained emotion that they cut deeper than any outburst of anger might have. "And your experience in formal households?" Kendra swallowed hard, aware of Martha and Cecilia drinking in every moment of her humiliation. "Limited to what I learned from books and magazines." The Whistling Kettle catered to miners and townspeople, as Cecilia said. Simple, hearty food. "How enterprising of you," Eleanor murmured, watching Bradley's face with the detached interest of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. creating an entirely fictitious background to secure a position in the Morgan household. Not entirely fictitious, Kendra protested, desperate now to make Bradley understand. Everything I know about cooking I learned from my mother, who was renowned throughout the county. The techniques, the recipes, those were genuine, even if the credentials were embellished. Embellished, Bradley repeated, the word falling between them like a stone. A curious euphemism for deception. Kendra had imagined many reactions to her confession: anger, disappointment, even cold dismissal. But the quiet devastation in Bradley's eyes was somehow worse than any of them. The man who had waltzed with her minutes ago, whose rare smile had been like sunshine after a long winter, regarded her now with the shuttered expression of a stranger. "Bradley," she began, reaching for his arm, "please let me explain." "I believe you just did," he interrupted, stepping back to avoid her touch. "You needed money to save your business, so you invented credentials to secure a position you were unqualified for. The explanation seems remarkably straightforward." Martha's satisfied smile could not have been more evident had she painted it across the town hall in foot-hall letters. "As I warned you, Bradley, some people will say anything, pretend to be anything to improve their circumstances." Bradley ignored his sister, his attention fixed solely on Kendra. "Was any of it real?" he asked, his voice dropping to ensure only she could hear. "Or was I simply part of your enterprise?" The question struck Kendra like a physical blow. "Bradley, no. What happened between us, what's been growing between us, that was never part of any plan or deception." For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. A flash of the man who had sought her company in the kitchen, who had shared confidences on midnight walks through the gardens, who had defied his sisters in Redstone Ridge society to bring her to the Easter ball. Then Richard Harrington cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "Fascinating as this domestic drama may be, I believe the orchestra is beginning another set. Bradley, might we have a word about the Silverton property? Since we're both here, it seems an ideal opportunity to discuss terms." The reminder of business matters provided Bradley with an escape from the intensely personal confrontation. He seized it like a drowning man clutching at flotsam. "Of course, if you'll excuse us, ladies." "Bradley, wait," Kendra began, but he was already moving away, his back stiff with the rigid control of a man fighting for composure. "Well," Cecilia said into the awkward silence that followed, "that was even more illuminating than I expected. The cook is actually a failed restaurateur with delusions of grandeur. Quite the Easter revelation." "Hardly failed," Kendra corrected, drawing on her last reserves of dignity. "The drought affected many businesses in town. The Whistling Kettle will reopen once conditions improve." "How optimistic," Martha observed, her voice dripping with disdain. "Though I doubt you'll be counting on Morgan patronage when it does." Kendra lifted her chin, channeling her father's stubborn pride. "The Whistling Kettle stood on its own merits long before I entered your brother's household, Miss Morgan. It will continue to do so regardless of your opinion, or his." With that, she turned away from the triumphant sisters, her steps carrying her toward the nearest exit. She needed air, needed to escape the suffocating weight of whispers and stares that followed in her wake. The beautiful ball, which had begun with such promise, had transformed into the public humiliation Martha and Cecilia had engineered. And Bradley, the man whose quiet strength and unexpected gentleness had captured her heart, now regarded her with the coldness reserved for those who had betrayed his trust. As Kendra slipped through the side door into the cool spring night, she wondered if there existed any path back from such a betrayal, or if, like the stone the Reverend had spoken of on Easter morning, this breach was simply too heavy to be moved by mere human effort. Stars wheeled overhead in the velvety darkness, indifferent to the human drama unfolding beneath them. Kendra stood in the town hall's small garden, her arms wrapped around herself against the evening chill. She had left her wrap inside, but returning for it would mean facing the curious stares and whispered comments that had surely erupted in her wake. "You'll catch your death out here," Bradley's voice came from behind her, startling Kendra from her troubled thoughts. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, her wrap draped over his arm. His expression remained unreadable in the dim light spilling from the ballroom. "Thank you," she said quietly as he approached. offering the garment with careful politeness. Their fingers brushed as she accepted it, the brief contact sending a jolt through her that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Bradley moved to stand beside her, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains rather than her face. "The carriage is waiting. I think it best if we depart." Not, "Would you like to leave," or "Shall we go home," but a simple statement of fact. Their evening was over. The fairy tale concluded with an abruptness that left Kendra breathless with pain. "Of course," she agreed, drawing the wrap more tightly around her shoulders. "I'm sorry to cut your evening short." It was already effectively concluded. Bradley's voice held the flat tone of a man deliberately controlling stronger emotions. "Harrington's presence changes the dynamics of tomorrow's meeting considerably. I need to review my figures before facing Winchester and the other investors." The retreat into business matters spoke volumes about his state of mind. This was Bradley Morgan, the businessman, not the man who had waltzed with her as if she were the only woman in the room. They walked in silence to the waiting carriage, the gap between them wider than the few feet of physical distance. Harrison held the door with his usual impassive dignity, though Kendra thought she detected a flicker of sympathy in the old butler's eyes as he helped her inside. To her dismay, Martha and Cecilia approached the carriage just as Bradley was about to enter. "Leaving so soon, brother?" Martha called, her voice carrying the false concern of a victory lap. "The evening is hardly half over." "I have preparations to make for tomorrow's meeting," Bradley replied, his tone brooking no argument, "particularly now that Harrington has involved himself." "Of course," Martha agreed smoothly. "Business must come first. Though I had hoped for one dance with my brother before departing." "Another time," Bradley said with finality, turning away from her. Martha's hand shot out, grasping his arm with surprising strength. "Bradley, wait. We should accompany you. After tonight's revelations, it hardly seems appropriate for you to travel alone with Miss Tompkins." The calculated insertion of propriety concerns after she had deliberately orchestrated Kendra's public humiliation might have been amusing if it weren't so transparent. Bradley's jaw tightened visibly. "Your concern for appearances comes remarkably late, Martha, if you'll excuse me." "I insist," Martha interrupted, her voice hardening. "Think of your position, Bradley. The investors, Harrington, the community, all witnessed that scene. Returning alone with her now would only compound the impropriety." For a moment, Bradley looked as if he might refuse outright. Then something, calculation, resignation, or simply weariness, flickered across his features. "Very well. If propriety concerns you so deeply, you may join us, though I doubt your presence will affect whatever gossip is already circulating." Martha smiled in triumph, turning to Cecilia. "We'll need our wraps. Would you be a dear and fetch them, and let Josephine know we're departing?" As Cecilia hurried to comply, Martha took Harrison's offered hand and climbed into the carriage, seating herself directly across from Kendra with the air of a queen taking her throne. Bradley followed, positioning himself at the far end of the seat beside his sister, as distant from Kendra as the confined space allowed. Cecilia returned moments later with the requested wraps and a concerned-looking Josephine in tow. "I told her we're leaving," Cecilia reported, handing Martha her cloak before arranging herself beside Kendra with obvious satisfaction. "I'll come too," Josephine declared, already climbing into the carriage despite its growing crowdedness. "I've had quite enough dancing for one evening." The unexpected ally settled herself firmly between Kendra and Cecilia, creating a small buffer that Kendra appreciated more than she could express. Josephine's sympathetic glance conveyed what words could not in the tense confines of the carriage. With all passengers arranged, Harrison closed the door, and the driver urged the horses forward with a gentle flick of the reins. The carriage rocked into motion, its interior filled with a silence as thick as molasses. "Well," Martha finally said as they left the town limits, "that was certainly an educational evening. I don't believe I've ever seen the Redstone Ridge social set quite so stimulated." When neither Bradley nor Kendra responded to this provocation, she continued with barely concealed satisfaction. "Mr. Winchester seemed particularly intrigued by tonight's developments. He mentioned something about questioning your judgment, Bradley. Most unfortunate given tomorrow's meeting." "Martha," Josephine warned, "this hardly seems the time." "On the contrary," Martha interrupted, "this is precisely the time for Bradley to consider the consequences of his impulsiveness. If he can be so thoroughly deceived by a cook with fabricated credentials, what does that suggest about his business acumen? Bradley's profile might have been carved from granite. My personal life has no bearing on the mine's operations or the viability of the new processing method. Don't be naive, Martha scoffed. Your investors don't simply evaluate numbers on a page. They evaluate you, your judgment, your stability, your commitment to their interests. Tonight hardly inspires confidence on any count. Kendra's hands clenched in her lap, her frustration building with each of Martha's poisonous observations. Miss Morgan, please, if you must discuss this matter, at least wait until... Until when? Martha cut her off with the casual disregard of someone addressing a servant who had overstepped. Until you've concocted another plausible fiction to explain your deception? I think we've all had quite enough of your inventive storytelling, Ms. Tompkins. That's enough, Martha. Bradley's voice cracked through the carriage like a whip. Whatever Ms. Tompkins's deception, it pales in comparison to your manipulations tonight. And in the past. Martha drew back as if struck, her composure faltering momentarily. I have only ever acted in your best interests, Bradley. Someone must protect the Morgan name and legacy, since you seem determined to squander both. By humiliating me publicly, by investigating my staff like a common detective, by orchestrating tonight's spectacle when a private conversation would have sufficed. Bradley's control slipped with each question, his voice rising slightly, despite his evident effort to maintain his composure. Your attachment to this woman clouded your judgment, Martha insisted, though with less conviction than before. You left me no choice but to intervene before irreparable damage was done. The only damage done tonight was your doing, Bradley said flatly. Whatever Miss Tompkins' deception, it was between employer and employee until you made it public theater. This unexpected defense, however qualified, sent a flicker of hope through Kendra's chest. Perhaps, once they were alone, she might explain her desperate circumstances, help him understand why she had resorted to such deception. Martha must have recognized the same possibility, for she abruptly clutched her stomach, a small groan escaping her lips. Oh, I feel quite faint suddenly. Martha? Josephine leaned forward, genuine concern replacing her earlier irritation. What is it? I don't know. Martha pressed a gloved hand to her forehead with theatrical precision. A sudden spell of dizziness. The excitement of the evening, perhaps, or the carriage motion. Bradley's expression suggested skepticism, but ingrained courtesy prevailed. Driver, he called through the small window, proceed directly to the house as quickly as is safe. Oh, thank you, Bradley, Martha murmured, leaning heavily against her brother's shoulder. I'm sure I'll recover once we're home, though I may need your assistance to reach my room. The transparent ploy to separate Bradley from Kendra upon their arrival was so obvious that Kendra might have laughed under different circumstances. Instead, she met Josephine's gaze across the carriage, reading in the younger woman's eyes the same recognition of Martha's tactics. The remainder of the journey passed in strained silence, broken only by Martha's occasional sighs and murmurs of discomfort. When they finally reached the Morgan mansion, Bradley and Josephine helped their ailing sister from the carriage, while Cecilia followed with evident satisfaction at the success of their scheme. Miss Tompkins, Bradley said formally as Harrison assisted Kendra to the ground, I trust you can see yourself in. I must attend to my sister. The dismissal, however necessitated by Martha's performance, cut deeply. Of course, Kendra replied, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from her voice. Family obligations must come first. Something flickered in Bradley's eyes, regret perhaps, or the recognition of how thoroughly Martha had manipulated them both. But before he could respond, Martha sagged dramatically against him, effectively ending any possibility of further conversation. Kendra watched as Bradley and Josephine guided Martha into the house through the main entrance, Cecilia trailing behind like a cat who had successfully cornered its prey. Only when they had disappeared from view did she allow her shoulders to slump in defeat. Quite a performance, wasn't it? Harrison observed quietly as he held the servants' entrance open for her. Miss Martha always did have a talent for the theatrical. The unexpected commentary from the usually impassive butler startled a small, choked laugh from Kendra. Yes, she did, she agreed, grateful for even the small acknowledgement that she wasn't alone in recognizing Martha's manipulations. Mr. Bradley will want to speak with you once Miss Martha is settled, Harrison added as they entered the dimly lit kitchen. He's not a man who appreciates having conversations interrupted or decisions made for him. You think he'll listen? Kendra couldn't keep the hope from her voice, though she tried to temper it with realism. After my deception, Harrison's weathered face softened into something approaching compassion. Mr. Bradley values honesty above all things, Miss Tompkins. But he also recognizes that desperate circumstances sometimes require desperate measures. He's not an unforgiving man. With that small encouragement, the butler left her to her thoughts, his footsteps fading down the hallway toward the main part of the house. Kendra removed her wrap and gloves, setting them aside with careful precision. Her beautiful ball gown, with its hastily mended tiers and borrowed splendor, seemed to mock her now. Like Cinderella after midnight, the magic had dissolved, leaving only the reality of who and what she truly was. A struggling cook who had reached beyond her station and paid the price for such presumption. She had just begun unfastening the tiny buttons at her wrist when the kitchen door swung open. Bradley stood framed in the doorway, his formal attire slightly disheveled from the effort of helping Martha to her room, his expression unreadable in the low lamplight. "Your sister is settled?" Kendra asked, breaking the awkward silence. Martha's illness miraculously improved once she was safely in her room with Cecilia in attendance, Bradley replied, his tone making it clear he had not been fooled. Josephine is with them, ensuring no further dramatic relapses occur. Despite everything, a small smile tugged at Kendra's lips. Your younger sister is more perceptive than Martha gives her credit for. Josephine has always seen more clearly than most. Bradley remained by the door, maintaining a physical distance that echoed the emotional gulf between them. Just as she saw through your deception from the beginning, it seems. The accusation, however justified, stung like salt in an open wound. She guessed some of it, Kendra acknowledged, though I never confided the full truth to her. The full truth? Bradley repeated the words slowly, testing them as one might test a suspicious coin. I'm not certain I even know what that is anymore, Miss Tompkins. The formal address, a deliberate step back from the intimacy they had shared, hurt more than Kendra had anticipated. Please, Bradley, at least allow me to explain. Explain what, exactly? That you created a fictional background to secure a position in my household? That you pretended experience you never had? That you allowed me to believe... He stopped abruptly, visibly regaining control of emotions that threatened to break through his carefully maintained facade. What possible explanation could justify such deliberate deception? Not justify, Kendra said quietly. Nothing justifies deception. But perhaps understand the desperation that drove it. She moved toward the kitchen table, needing its solid support beneath her trembling hands. The whistling kettle was my parents' dream. After they died, my brother and I continued operating it, but the drought has been hard on everyone. Miners working reduced shifts, families struggling to afford even basic meals. Bradley remained impassive, though he moved further into the kitchen, allowing the door to swing closed behind him. Go on. Our landlord raised the rent significantly, Kendra continued, the words coming more easily now that she had begun. He had an offer for the building, and we couldn't match it. He gave us until Easter to pay in full or vacate. She looked up, meeting Bradley's gaze directly. When I heard about the position here, I knew the wages would be enough to save the whistling kettle, but I also knew a simple cook from a struggling eatery wouldn't impress Harrison or meet your sister's expectations. So you invented credentials you thought would secure the position, Bradley concluded, his voice neutral. The territorial governor, the formal household experience, all fabrications designed to appeal to Martha's sense of propriety. Yes, Kendra admitted, relief at finally speaking the truth mingling with shame at the admission. I told myself it was just a temporary position, that the deception hurt no one, that the end justified the means. She shook her head, acknowledging the flaws in her reasoning. I never imagined that we would become something more than employer and employee, Bradley finished when she faltered. Yes, the simple word carried the weight of all the unspoken feelings that had grown between them over shared midnight conversations, rides to the clifftop, and moments of unexpected connection. Bradley moved to the window, staring out at the moonlit grounds as if seeking answers in the silver-washed landscape. When did you intend to tell me the truth? Tonight, Kendra replied honestly. After the ball. I wanted one perfect evening before reality intruded. Bradley's shoulders stiffened, his back still turned to her. Did you ever consider that I deserved to know who I was truly inviting to the Easter ball? Who I was defending to my sisters and introducing to my business associates? The question cut to the heart of her deception, exposing the selfishness that had motivated her continued silence, even as their relationship deepened. I was afraid, she admitted softly. Afraid of losing not just the position, but whatever was growing between us. Bradley turned then, his expression a complex mixture of hurt, anger, and something deeper that might have been regret. I trusted you, Kendra. More than I've trusted anyone since Eleanor. I believed in your straightforward honesty, your refreshing lack of pretense, all while you were maintaining the most fundamental pretense of all. The cooking was real, Kendra insisted, desperate now to salvage some truth from the ruins of her deception. Everything I prepared came from my own knowledge and experience. The skills were genuine, even if the credentials were not. That distinction hardly matters now. Bradley ran a hand through his hair, disheveling it further. What matters is that you allowed me to build expectations based on a foundation of sand. You saw how Martha and Cecilia manipulated the situation, yet you still hesitated to tell me the truth yourself. I was wrong, Kendra acknowledged, her voice catching. I should have told you when I realized that what was happening between us mattered more than any position or wage. For a moment, something softened in Bradley's expression. A flicker of the man who had waltzed with her, who had defended her to his sisters, who had begun to open his heart after years of careful isolation. Then he straightened, the mantle of Bradley Morgan, mine owner and businessman, settling back over his shoulders. I think it best if you return to town tomorrow, he said with careful formality. I'll provide a month's wages as severance, which should address your immediate concerns regarding the whistling kettle. Though Kendra had anticipated this outcome, the finality of it still struck like a physical blow. Bradley, please. My decision is made, Miss Tompkins. The return to formal address underscored the distance he was deliberately placing between them. Harrison will arrange transportation after breakfast. I would appreciate it if you would ensure the kitchen is properly organized for whoever replaces you. The businesslike request, reducing their relationship once more to that of employer and employee, crushed Kendra's last hope of reconciliation. She straightened, pulling her dignity around her like armor. Of course, Mr. Morgan. I'll leave everything in perfect order. Bradley moved toward the door, then paused, his hand on the latch. For a breathless moment, Kendra thought he might turn back, might offer some small opening for further conversation or eventual forgiveness. Instead, he said without turning, I would have understood if you had told me from the beginning. That's what hurts the most. Not the deception itself, but your lack of faith in my ability to understand desperate circumstances. With that parting observation, he was gone, the door swinging closed behind him with a soft finality that echoed the closing of whatever future they might have shared. Kendra remained motionless in the moonlit kitchen. The beautiful gown that had briefly transformed her from cook to belle of the ball, now as hollow a pretense as her fabricated credentials had been. Tomorrow, she would return to Redstone Ridge, to the whistling kettle, to the life she had briefly escaped. Bradley's severance would save the eatery, at least temporarily, but nothing could salvage the trust she had broken or heal the pain she had glimpsed in his eyes, pain she had caused through her own fear and hesitation. Outside, clouds drifted across the moon, casting the kitchen into momentary darkness. Even Easter's promise of redemption and new beginnings seemed hollow now, as empty as the grand ballroom after the last dance had ended and the final guest departed. Some stones, it seemed, were simply too heavy to be rolled away, no matter how fervently one might wish it otherwise. Chapter 8. Fractures and Forgiveness. First light crept through the small window of the servants' quarters, painting the sparse room in shades of pearl and rose. Kendra folded her plain work dress with careful precision, placing it in the carpet bag that seemed much emptier now than when she had arrived at the Morgan estate. She had risen before dawn, unable to sleep as thoughts of the previous night's humiliation and Bradley's cold dismissal circled endlessly in her mind. The beautiful lilac gown hung on the back of the door, a painful reminder of momentary transformation and shattered hopes. Josephine had insisted she keep it. It was altered for you, after all, but Kendra couldn't bear to take it. The gown belonged to a fantasy that had dissolved like morning mist beneath the harsh sunlight of truth. A soft knock interrupted her methodical packing. Kendra paused, her mother's worn cookbook in hand, and called, "Come in." Josephine Morgan slipped through the door, already dressed, though the hour was early. Dark smudges beneath her eyes suggested she had slept no better than Kendra. "You're leaving at first light?" Josephine asked, though the evidence was plain before her. "I had hoped to speak with you before you departed." "Mr. Morgan was quite clear about his wishes," Kendra replied, tucking the cookbook carefully into her bag. "Harrison has arranged for the delivery wagon to take me to town after breakfast." "Bradley is being stubborn and foolish," Josephine declared with unexpected vehemence. "He's allowing Martha's manipulations and his own wounded pride to override what he knows in his heart." Kendra shook her head slightly. "It's not simply pride, Josephine. I deceived him. Allowed him to believe in credentials I didn't possess, in experiences I never had. For a man who values honesty as Bradley does, such deception strikes at the foundation of trust. Yet he understood immediately why Eleanor left him, once I explained Martha's role in it." Josephine perched on the edge of the narrow bed, heedless of her fine morning dress against the simple quilted coverlet. "He forgave Eleanor, completely, though she caused him far more pain than your harmless embellishment of cooking credentials." "That's different," Kendra said softly, abandoning her packing to sit beside the younger woman. "Eleanor was manipulated by Martha. I chose my deception freely, maintained it even as—" She faltered, unable to put into words the connection that had grown between herself and Bradley. "Even as you fell in love with him," Josephine finished for her, her perception cutting through pretense. "And he with you, though he'd sooner cut off his right arm than admit it now." Kendra flushed, neither confirming nor denying the gentle accusation. "Whatever grew between us, my deception poisoned it beyond recovery. Your brother made that quite clear last night." "My brother is a stubborn fool who learned caution at great cost," Josephine countered. "When our father died, Bradley shouldered responsibilities that would have crushed most men. He was barely 21, facing creditors and investors who expected him to fail as father had seemingly failed. Then, just as he brought the mine to profitability and secured his position, Eleanor broke their engagement." "At Martha's urging," Kendra recalled. "Yes, though Bradley didn't know that until recently." Josephine's expression softened with compassion. "He built walls around his heart after Eleanor, convinced that focusing solely on the mine and its operations was safer than risking himself in personal attachments. Then you arrived and those walls began to crumble, despite his best efforts to maintain them. And now they're rebuilt, higher and stronger than before," Kendra observed, returning to her packing to hide the tears that threatened, as they should be. "Your brother deserves someone who comes to him with complete honesty from the beginning." "What he deserves and what he needs are entirely different matters," Josephine replied with surprising insight. "Bradley needs someone who sees him as a man, not a fortune or a position. Someone who challenges his assumptions and reminds him that there's more to life than silver yields and investor meetings." She reached over to still Kendra's hands in their restless folding. "He needs you, Kendra, though his pride won't let him admit it yet." "You're very kind," Kendra said, gently disengaging her hands to continue packing. "But the truth is simpler than you imagine. I'm the daughter of Joseph Tompkins, a miner who died owing more than he possessed. I run a struggling eatery that serves beans and biscuits to working men. Your brother is Bradley Morgan, owner of the richest silver mine in the territory and heir to Boston society's expectations. Our worlds were never meant to intersect. Yet they did, and both of you were happier for it until Martha and Cecilia interfered." Josephine rose, smoothing her skirts with a determination that reminded Kendra suddenly of Bradley. "Martha's interference stems from her own unhappiness, you know. Her marriage is failing spectacularly, though she'd die before admitting it publicly." This unexpected revelation caught Kendra's attention. Her husband in Boston? Edward has been keeping a dancer in New York for over a year, Josephine confirmed, her voice dropping, though no one could possibly overhear them in the servants' wing at this hour. He wants a divorce. Unthinkable in Martha's social circle, her desperate need to control everything around her, including Bradley's life choices, stems from her own crumbling world. I'm sorry for her pain, Kendra said sincerely, but it doesn't excuse what she did last night. The public humiliation, the deliberate exposure of my deception at the moment when it would cause maximum damage. No, it doesn't, Josephine agreed, her expression darkening. Martha's tactics were cruel and calculated, but understanding why she acted as she did might help you and Bradley find a measure of forgiveness in time. Kendra snapped her carpet bag closed with a finality that belied the turmoil in her heart. There's nothing to forgive. I deceived your brother and he dismissed me, as is his right. The matter is concluded. Josephine studied her face for a long moment, then sighed. Will you at least leave him a letter? Something explaining your circumstances more fully, now that the initial shock has passed. Bradley has a keen sense of fairness beneath his wounded pride. Given time and reflection, he might see this situation differently. The suggestion pierced Kendra's carefully maintained composure. She had, in fact, spent much of the night composing such a letter in her mind, though she had convinced herself it would be unwelcome. Do you really think he would read it? I know he would, Josephine replied with quiet certainty. Whatever his current anger, Bradley would never discard a sincere attempt at explanation. Kendra hesitated, then moved to the small writing desk in the corner. I'll need a few minutes. Take all the time you need, Josephine assured her, moving toward the door. I'll make sure the wagon doesn't leave without you. She paused, her hand on the latch. For what it's worth, Kendra, I believe you brought something to this household that it has sorely needed. Warmth, genuineness, life beyond the endless pursuit of business success. I hope someday Bradley realizes what he's losing by letting you go. With that parting thought, Josephine slipped out, leaving Kendra alone with blank paper and the daunting task of condensing her complicated feelings into words that might bridge the chasm between herself and Bradley. An hour later, the letter sealed and addressed, Kendra descended to the kitchen for the final time. Mrs. Winters supervised the breakfast preparations with her usual efficiency, though Kendra noticed the housekeeper had prepared all of Bradley's particular favorites: crisp bacon, eggs with just a touch of herbs, the sourdough bread he preferred to fancy pastries. A peace offering, Kendra asked quietly as she helped arrange the silver tray. Mrs. Winters' thin lips curved in the barest suggestion of a smile. Men are often more reasonable after a good meal, even stubborn ones like Mr. Morgan. I hope you're right, Kendra replied, though without much conviction. She handed the sealed letter to the housekeeper. Would you see that Mr. Morgan receives this? After I've gone, preferably. Mrs. Winters accepted the letter with a solemn nod. Consider it done. And, Miss Tompkins? The older woman's usually stern expression softened slightly. This house will be poorer for your departure. The simple acknowledgement from a woman not given to sentimental declarations touched Kendra deeply. Thank you for everything. Harrison appeared in the doorway, his dignified bearing at odds with the genuine regret in his eyes. The wagon is prepared, Miss Tompkins, whenever you're ready. Kendra glanced around the kitchen one last time. The gleaming copper pots, the massive range, the work table where she and Bradley had kneaded bread together in a rare moment of uncomplicated connection. How quickly she had come to think of this space as hers, to take pride in the meals created here, to find joy in the simple act of nourishing the household. I'm ready, she said, retrieving her carpet bag from where she had left it by the door. Her gaze moved toward the main part of the house. Is Mr. Morgan? In his study, Harrison replied, understanding her unasked question. He asked not to be disturbed this morning. Of course. Bradley Morgan, master of the house and keeper of his own counsel, would not emerge to bid farewell to a cook who had deceived him. The formal dismissal in the kitchen the previous night was to be their final interaction. Josephine waited by the delivery wagon, her expression troubled but determined. I tried to speak with Bradley, she admitted, as Harrison loaded Kendra's carpet bag into the vehicle. He refused to open his study door. "It's better this way," Kendra said, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. "Clean breaks heal faster than messy ones." "Perhaps," Josephine agreed without conviction, "but sometimes the cleanest breaks leave the deepest scars." She reached out, clasping Kendra's hands in her own. "Promise me you'll consider reopening the Whistling Kettle. Redstone Ridge needs establishments with genuine heart, not just profit motives." "With the severance your brother provided, reopening is possible," Kendra acknowledged. "Though whether the town will welcome me after last night's display is another matter entirely. People's memories are shorter than you might think, especially when good food is involved." Josephine squeezed her hands once more before releasing them. "Besides, you have at least one champion in town already." "Oh?" Sheriff Taylor stopped by early this morning, ostensibly to discuss security for the remaining Easter festivities. Josephine's eyes twinkled with unexpected mischief. "He made a point of mentioning how much he missed the Whistling Kettle's apple dumplings, and how the town hasn't been the same without Joseph Tompkins' daughter's cooking." The simple gesture of support from an unexpected quarter brought fresh tears to Kendra's eyes. "That was kind of him." "Kindness exists in more corners of Redstone Ridge than my brother currently recognizes," Josephine observed. "Remember that when doubt creeps in." With a final embrace that bridged the gulf between their stations with simple human connection, Kendra climbed into the delivery wagon. As the driver flicked the reins to set the horses in motion, she allowed herself one backward glance at the Morgan mansion gleaming in the morning sunlight. From a second-floor window, Bradley's study, a curtain fell back into place, as if someone had been watching but withdrew upon being noticed. Then the wagon rounded the bend in the drive, and the house disappeared from view, taking with it whatever might have been between Kendra Tompkins and Bradley Morgan. Bradley Morgan stood at his study window, watching the delivery wagon disappear down the winding drive toward town. Though he had withdrawn from view when Kendra glanced back, the image of her small carpet bag at her feet, the same blue dress she'd worn upon arrival, now seeming to hang more loosely on her frame, remained etched in his mind with painful clarity. Pride had kept him sequestered in his study, prevented him from offering even the simple courtesy of a proper farewell. Yet that same pride felt hollow now, a poor substitute for the warmth that had briefly illuminated his carefully ordered life. Coward. The single word, delivered from the doorway in Josephine's distinctive voice, cut through his brooding thoughts. Bradley turned, scowling at his younger sister's intrusion. "I don't recall inviting you in," he observed coolly. "You didn't. I took the liberty of picking the lock." Josephine closed the door behind her, leaning against it with arms crossed. "A useful skill I learned from Father during one of his more creative periods. He said a lady should always be able to access rooms that men try to keep her from." Despite his dark mood, Bradley felt a reluctant smile tug at his lips. Their father's unconventional wisdom had often scandalized Martha while delighting Josephine. Breaking and entering is hardly ladylike behavior. Neither is hiding in one's study while a woman who cares deeply for you is forced to leave without even a proper goodbye, Josephine countered, pushing away from the door to approach his desk. "I expected better of you, Bradley." The gentle accusation struck closer to home than he cared to admit. Bradley turned back to the window, though the wagon was long out of sight. "Miss Tompkins deceived me from the moment she entered this house. She invented credentials, fabricated experiences, and maintained the deception even as—" He trailed off, unwilling to voice the depth of connection that had grown between them. "Even as you fell in love with her," Josephine finished quietly. Bradley's shoulders stiffened. "Don't be dramatic, Josie. I was fond of Miss Tompkins, certainly. She was refreshingly different from the society women Martha parades before me. But love requires trust, and how can I trust someone who began our acquaintance with deliberate falsehoods? Oh, for heaven's sake." Josephine's exasperation burst forth with uncharacteristic force. She pretended to have cooked for a governor when she'd actually run a respectable eatery in town. She didn't claim to be a Russian princess or the widow of a railroad baron. Her cooking was exactly as represented: skillful, creative, and consistently excellent. The deception harmed no one until Martha and Cecilia deliberately exposed it in the most humiliating manner possible. You knew! Bradley turned to face his sister, fresh betrayal coloring his tone. You knew she wasn't what she claimed to be? I suspected, Josephine corrected. Martha's investigations confirmed it. But by then, I had seen what truly mattered. How genuinely Kendra cared for this household. For you, especially. How she worked tirelessly to meet Martha's impossible standards while maintaining her dignity and good humor. How she brought light back into your eyes for the first time in 3 years. Bradley sank into his desk chair, suddenly weary beyond words. Her reasons don't excuse the deception. No, but they explain it. Josephine settled into the chair opposite him, her expression softening. She was desperate to save her family's business, Bradley. The Whistling Kettle was her parents' legacy, all she had left of them. Would you not have done the same if father's mine had been at stake? The comparison struck uncomfortably close to home. Bradley had made difficult choices, compromised principles he had once held dear, all to preserve and build upon his father's legacy. Could he truly claim moral superiority over Kendra's more modest deception? It's done now, he said finally, retreating to the safety of finality. Miss Tompkins has returned to town with generous severance. The matter is concluded. Is it? Josephine leaned forward, her earnest gaze demanding honesty he was reluctant to give. Can you truly say that watching her drive away felt like conclusion rather than amputation? Before Bradley could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much, the study door burst open to admit Martha, her normally perfect composure notably absent. Her face was flushed, her breathing uneven as if she had run up the stairs, something the dignified Martha Morgan had likely not done since childhood. Is it true? She demanded without preamble. Did you dismiss Miss Tompkins? Send her back to town without even a hearing? Bradley stared at his elder sister in disbelief. After her orchestrated humiliation of Kendra at the ball, her faked illness to prevent private conversation on the return journey, this sudden concern seemed nothing short of astonishing. I believe you made your opinion of Miss Tompkins quite clear last night, he replied coolly. Her deception, her unsuitability, her threat to the Morgan reputation, you covered all points thoroughly before half of Redstone Ridge Society. That was before, Martha broke off, visibly struggling to regain her customary poise. Things have changed since last night. What things, exactly? Bradley's patience, already stretched thin, threatened to snap entirely. Has she suddenly acquired the Boston pedigree you seem to think essential? Or have you found a more suitable replacement in Cecilia and no longer feel threatened by Miss Tompkins's presence? Bradley! Josephine exclaimed, shocked by the uncharacteristic bitterness in his tone. Martha, however, merely closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength for what came next. When she reopened them, Bradley was startled to see genuine distress where he had expected only calculation. Edward has filed for divorce, she said, each word precise despite the visible effort it cost her. The papers arrived by special messenger this morning. He cites irredeemable differences in temperament and irreconcilable expectations regarding marital obligations. The formal legal phrases, recited in Martha's carefully controlled voice, failed to disguise the devastation beneath. Bradley rose from his chair, his anger at his sister temporarily eclipsed by concern for her evident pain. Martha, Don't, she interrupted, holding up one hand to ward off sympathy she clearly feared would break her composure entirely. This isn't about me or my failed marriage. This is about you, and the mistake you're making in sending Miss Tompkins away. Of all the responses Bradley might have anticipated, this was perhaps the last. He exchanged a bewildered glance with Josephine, who appeared equally confused by Martha's unexpected advocacy. Yesterday you orchestrated her public humiliation, Bradley reminded her carefully. Today you champion her cause. Forgive me if I question the sincerity of this sudden change of heart. I deserve that, Martha acknowledged, surprising him further. She moved to the window, gazing out at the mountains with unusual introspection. Edward's announcement has forced me to recognize certain truths about myself, about the damage I've done in the name of protecting this family. The admission, delivered without Martha's usual certainty, created a silence heavy with unspoken history. Bradley remained standing behind his desk, unwilling to break the moment with premature questions or judgments. I thought I was protecting you, Martha continued, her back still turned to her siblings, from Eleanor, who I believed would hold you back from your rightful place in society, From your own impulsiveness, which I feared would lead you to repeat father's mistakes. From the wilderness of this territory, which seemed determined to swallow the Morgan name and legacy. And from Kendra Tompkins, Josephine added softly, a woman without connections or fortune, who threatened your vision of Bradley's future. Martha nodded slowly, still facing the window. I believed I knew best. That my experiences in Boston society, my understanding of what was required to maintain our position, gave me the right to direct our family's course. As you directed Eleanor? Bradley asked, the question that had haunted him for 3 years finally finding voice. Did you truly believe she would hold me back, Martha? Or was it simply that you couldn't control her as you wished to control me? Martha turned at last, her expression more vulnerable than Bradley had seen since the days following their parents' deaths. I told myself it was for your own good. That Eleanor's modest background and lack of social polish would become a liability once you returned to Boston society, that she would come to resent the expectations placed upon a Morgan wife, and you would resent her inability to meet them, so you persuaded her to break our engagement. The confirmation of his long-held suspicion settled like lead in Bradley's stomach. Did you offer her money, Martha, as father might have done to eliminate an obstacle? Josephine gasped softly at the brutal question, but Martha didn't flinch. I tried, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She refused it, said she wasn't for sale at any price. A ghost of admiration flickered across Martha's features. In the end, I convinced her that leaving you was an act of love, that she would only hold you back from the success and position you deserved. The revelation, though long suspected, still cut Bradley deeply. You had no right, he said, his voice dangerously quiet, no right to make that decision for either of us. I know that now. Martha moved to the chair beside Josephine's, sinking into it with uncharacteristic weariness. Edward made the same argument when he asked for the divorce, that I had spent our marriage directing his choices, managing his associations, planning our future according to my vision rather than our shared one. Her voice caught slightly. He said living with me was like being constantly assessed and found wanting. The painful admission hung in the air between the siblings. Bradley remained standing, absorbing the implications of Martha's unexpected confession and its relevance to his current situation with Kendra. Why are you telling me this now? He asked finally. What does your marriage have to do with Miss Tompkins? Because I see myself repeating the same pattern, Martha replied, meeting his gaze directly. Manipulating, controlling, destroying genuine connection in the name of propriety and position. Last night, watching Cecilia gloat over Miss Tompkins's humiliation, I recognized something of myself in her calculated cruelty. It was illuminating in the most uncomfortable way possible. And now you've had a complete change of heart regarding Kendra's suitability? Bradley's skepticism couldn't be entirely suppressed, despite Martha's evident sincerity. Not entirely, Martha admitted with surprising honesty. I still believe there would be significant challenges for both of you should you pursue a relationship beyond employer and employee. But I've lost the certainty that I know what's best for your happiness, Bradley. Edward's letter made that painfully clear. Josephine reached over to take her sister's hand, a gesture of support that Martha accepted with visible gratitude. What Martha's trying to say, Bradley, is that she recognizes now how her actions affected both you and Kendra, that perhaps her judgment wasn't as infallible as she believed. Precisely. Martha straightened in her chair, some of her customary dignity returning. Miss Tompkins deceived you about her credentials, yes, but I deceived you about Eleanor's reasons for leaving. Which betrayal cut deeper? Which has left you more wounded? And if you could forgive me, despite the years of happiness my interference cost you, might you not find it in your heart to at least hear Miss Tompkins's explanation? The questions, delivered with Martha's characteristic precision but unusual humility, struck at the very foundation of Bradley's resistance. He sank back into his chair, suddenly aware of the parallels between the situations, and of his own potential hypocrisy in forgiving one deception while condemning another. It may be too late, he said after a long silence, his voice rougher than he intended. I was harsh in my dismissal, unyielding in my judgment. Qualities you inherited from father, Martha observed with the ghost of a smile. Along with his stubbornness and inability to admit when he might have been wrong, fortunately, he also inherited Mother's capacity for forgiveness and recognition of what truly matters, Josephine added, her expression brightening with hope. It's not too late, Bradley. Kendra only left an hour ago. The Whistling Kettle hasn't reopened yet. There's still time to what exactly? Bradley interrupted, rising to pace before the window. Ride into town like some knight-errant, beg her forgiveness for my pride and hastiness, and expect her to return to a household where she's been publicly humiliated, where her position would remain forever ambiguous, neither servant nor equal? Martha and Josephine exchanged glances, a silent communication that reminded Bradley suddenly of their childhood, when the sisters would form unexpected alliances against parental dictates, or his own brotherly authority. Perhaps the ambiguity is the point, Martha suggested carefully. Perhaps it's time for all of us to reconsider what constitutes suitable position and appropriate relationships in this wilderness that has become our home. What exactly are you proposing? Bradley asked, his suspicion returning at this sudden philosophical turn from his usually practical sister. That you follow your heart rather than society's expectations, Martha replied simply. That you recognize what I failed to see with Edward, that genuine connection is rarer and more valuable than social advantage or business alliance. She paused, then added with surprising vulnerability, that you learn from my mistakes rather than repeating them. The admission from a woman who had spent her life directing others while rarely acknowledging her own missteps rendered Bradley momentarily speechless. Josephine seized the opportunity to press their advantage. Kendra left a letter for you, she informed him, nodding toward his desk where an envelope had been placed among the morning's correspondence. Mrs. Winters was instructed to deliver it after Kendra's departure. Perhaps you might begin by reading her explanation rather than assuming the worst of her motives. Bradley's gaze fixed on the envelope, Kendra's neat handwriting spelling out his name with the same care she brought to everything she undertook. The sight of it, this tangible connection to the woman whose absence already left his house feeling emptier than he cared to admit, awakened emotions he had spent the night attempting to suppress. I'll need time, he said finally, neither accepting nor rejecting his sister's unexpected counsel. The investors' meeting in Denver cannot be postponed, regardless of personal considerations. Of course, Martha agreed, rising with a rustle of silk skirts. Business must come first. But, Bradley... She paused at the door, her usual composure restored, though her eyes still held shadows of her private pain. When Father died, I believed it fell to me to protect this family, its name, its position, its future. I see now that in my determination to preserve what was, I nearly destroyed what could be. Don't make the same mistake with Miss Tompkins. With that uncharacteristically philosophical observation, Martha departed, leaving Bradley to contemplate the letter on his desk and the unexpected shift in family dynamics her confession had precipitated. Josephine lingered, studying her brother with the perceptive gaze that had always seen more than others gave her credit for. She's trying, Bradley. The news from Edward hit her harder than she'll ever admit, but instead of retreating into bitterness, she's reaching for understanding. It's progress, Bradley nodded, acknowledging the significant shift in Martha's approach. Edward's timing is either remarkably fortunate or deliberately calculated. I wonder which. Does it matter? Josephine asked pragmatically. The result is the same. Martha, recognizing how her controlling nature has damaged those she genuinely wished to protect. She moved toward the door, then paused, echoing Martha's earlier stance. Read Kendra's letter, Bradley. Whatever you decide afterward, at least give her the courtesy of understanding her perspective before passing final judgment. When Josephine had gone, Bradley remained standing at the window for long minutes, his gaze unfocused as he processed the morning's unexpected revelations. Martha's confession about Eleanor, her admission of her own failings, the parallel she drew between her controlling behavior and his current dismissal of Kendra, all combined to cast his righteous anger in a more questionable light. Finally, he moved to his desk and picked up Kendra's letter. The paper felt surprisingly heavy in his hand, weighted with explanations and perhaps regrets that might shift the trajectory of a future he had begun to envision with her beside him. Only one way to find out. Breaking the simple wax seal, Bradley unfolded the letter and began to read. The whistling kettle stood silent and dusty, exactly as Kendra had left it nearly a month before. She unlocked the front door with hands that trembled slightly, inhaling the familiar scents of dried herbs, coffee beans, and the lingering traces of her father's pipe tobacco that somehow still clung to the curtains years after his passing home. Despite everything, despite the brief glory of the Morgan mansion with its gleaming copper pots and modern range, this modest eatery with its scarred wooden counter and mismatched chairs remained the truest expression of who Kendra Tompkins really was. Daniel appeared in the doorway between the dining room and the kitchen, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd arrived earlier to start the fires and clear away the worst of the dust, his way of welcoming her home without drawing attention to the circumstances of her return. "Thought I heard you," he said, his voice deliberately casual, though his eyes searched her face for signs of distress. "Everything's about ready in the kitchen. Water's heating on the stove." "Thank you." Kendra moved behind the counter, running her fingers along its worn surface as if greeting an old friend. The familiar terrain of her previous life settled around her like a comfortable garment, though one that no longer quite fit as it once had. How bad are things, truly? Daniel's hesitation confirmed what she already suspected. Schilling came by yesterday, said he'd give us until the end of the month, but not a day more. He's got an offer from a Denver businessman looking to open a fancy restaurant. The severance from the Morgan estate will cover 2 months' rent and supplies, Kendra calculated, mentally reviewing their expenses. After that, we might need to consider other options, Daniel finished for her, the words clearly difficult for him to voice. Jenkins mentioned the hotel in Central City is looking for a head cook. The Silver Strike there has brought in enough business that they're expanding. Central City. Nearly 50 miles away. Far enough to feel like exile from the only home she'd ever known. Yet perhaps distance was exactly what she needed. Distance from the memories of Bradley Morgan's rare smile, from the whispers that would surely follow her through Redstone Ridge after her humiliation at the Easter ball. "We'll manage somehow," Kendra said with more confidence than she felt. "First, let's get the kettle open for Easter Monday. People will be curious about my time at the Morgan estate, if nothing else." Daniel's expression darkened. "They've been talking since the ball. Mrs. Peterson stopped by yesterday, ostensibly to ask when we'd reopen, but really to fish for details about you and Bradley Morgan." The casual use of Bradley's name sent a pang through Kendra's heart. "Then we'll give them something else to talk about," she declared, setting her carpetbag on the counter with sudden determination. "We're going to serve free Easter meals to the miners' families tomorrow." "Free?" Daniel stared at her as if she'd announced plans to fly to the moon. "Kendra, we can barely afford to reopen, let alone give away food." "The Morgan severance provides enough for a fresh start," Kendra insisted. "What better way to redirect the town's gossip than an act of generosity? Besides, many of the miners are working reduced shifts because of the drought. Their families could use a proper Easter dinner." Daniel studied her face, then nodded slowly, a reluctant smile tugging at his mouth. Pa would approve. He always said the measure of a person wasn't how they acted in success, but how they conducted themselves after failure. "This isn't failure," Kendra corrected, untying her bonnet with renewed purpose. "It's simply a return to who I truly am." She opened her carpetbag, extracting several small cards. "I've written notes to our regular customers explaining my absence and announcing our reopening. Could you deliver these while I start inventory?" As Daniel departed on his errand, Kendra moved through the small eatery with practiced efficiency, noting what supplies remained usable and what would need immediate replacement. The familiar routine settled her thoughts, providing concrete tasks to focus on rather than the ache that threatened to overwhelm her whenever she allowed her mind to drift toward the Morgan estate and the man who had awakened feelings she'd never expected to experience. By late afternoon, the whistling kettle had been restored to its former modest glory. Fresh gingham curtains hung at the windows, the floors gleamed from vigorous scrubbing, and the dining room tables wore their best cloths in preparation for the next day's reopening. The scent of yeast and baking bread filled the air, mingling with the rich aroma of the beef stew simmering on the back of the stove. Kendra stood in the kitchen doorway, surveying her handiwork with satisfaction, when a knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. She wiped her hands on her apron, assuming Daniel had returned from his errands, but the figure on the other side of the glass was distinctly feminine. Josephine Morgan stood on the boardwalk, her elegant spring dress and fashionable bonnet drawing curious glances from passers-by. In her gloved hands, she clutched a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. "Josephine!" Kendra hurried to unlock the door, surprise and pleasure momentarily overriding the caution that warned against renewing connections to the Morgan family. "I didn't expect. Please, come in." "I can only stay a moment," Josephine said as she stepped inside, removing her gloves with practiced grace. "Martha believes I'm selecting ribbons at the Mercantile, and while she's shown remarkable improvement since this morning, I'd rather not test her newfound self-awareness too severely." "This morning?" Kendra echoed, leading Josephine to a table near the window. "Has something happened?" "Many things," Josephine replied cryptically, "but they're Bradley's to share if he chooses." She glanced around the whistling kettle with genuine interest. "So this is your family's establishment. It has character, warmth that the hotel dining room entirely lacks." "It's modest," Kendra acknowledged, "but honest, like the food we serve." "Honesty has much to recommend it," Josephine agreed, her expression growing more serious. "As does forgiveness." She placed the package on the table between them. "This arrived for you at the house just after you left. I thought it might be important." Kendra eyed the package with confusion. "For me? At the Morgan estate? From Denver, according to the messenger. Something about the Founders' Day cooking competition? The messenger was most insistent it reach you promptly." With hesitant fingers, Kendra untied the string and unwrapped the brown paper. Inside lay an official-looking document bearing the seal of the Colorado Territorial Agricultural and Culinary Society, along with a small velvet pouch. "I don't understand," Kendra murmured, unfolding the document. "I entered Pa's special chili recipe in the Founders' Day competition last autumn, but never heard back. I assumed someone else had won." "Evidently not," Josephine observed as Kendra's eyes widened in shock while reading the letter. "First prize," Kendra breathed, looking up in disbelief. "They're awarding me first prize in the culinary division." There was a delay in judging due to illness among the committee members, but she opened the velvet pouch, gasping softly as a gold medal and several banknotes slid into her palm. $200 prize money. Josephine beamed, genuine pleasure lighting her features. "Congratulations! That's wonderful news. Kendra shook her head, momentarily speechless. "It's the answer to our prayers. With this and the Morgan severance, we can pay Schilling's increased rent for 6 months at least, restock completely, even hire help for the busier days." She looked up, sudden suspicion narrowing her eyes. "Josephine, did you have anything to do with this?" Josephine finished, her expression all innocence. "How could I? The competition was last autumn, long before we met. You earned this recognition through your own skill, Kendra. Though I confess the timing does seem remarkably fortuitous." Whether Josephine had somehow influenced the timing of this announcement, Kendra couldn't determine from her carefully neutral expression, but the young woman's pleasure in Kendra's good fortune seemed genuine enough. "Will you reopen the whistling kettle then?" Josephine asked, "rather than leaving Redstone Ridge?" The question caught Kendra off guard. "How did you know we were considering leaving?" "Small towns harbor few secrets," Josephine replied with a slight shrug. "Daniel mentioned the possibility to Sheriff Taylor, who mentioned it to his wife, who happened to comment on it to Mrs. Winters while purchasing eggs this morning." "Despite everything," Kendra laughed. "The Redstone Ridge telegraph system functions more efficiently than Western Union, it seems." "Indeed." Josephine rose, smoothing her skirts with practiced precision. "I should return before Martha organizes a search party, but Kendra?" Her expression softened into unexpected seriousness. "Don't give up on Bradley just yet. He's stubborn and proud like Father was, but he's also fair. Once the initial hurt passes, he may see things differently." "I deceived him, Josephine," Kendra reminded her gently. "For a man who values honesty above all else, that's not something easily forgiven or forgotten." "Perhaps not," Josephine conceded, moving toward the door. "But then, forgiveness worth having rarely comes easily, does it?" She paused, her hand on the latch. "The whistling kettle reopens tomorrow?" For Easter Monday, yes. We're serving free meals to the miners' families affected by the reduced shifts. How generous, Josephine observed with approval. I'll be sure to mention it to Bradley when he returns from Denver. He's always had a particular concern for the miners' welfare. With that parting comment, delivered with studied casualness that didn't quite disguise its calculated nature, Josephine departed, leaving Kendra to contemplate the unexpected prize money and the even more unexpected suggestion that Bradley might not consider their connection entirely severed. Don't, she whispered to herself as hope flickered dangerously in her chest. Don't build castles on shifting sand. Instead, she channeled her energy into preparations for the next day's reopening. She wrote a notice announcing free Easter Monday meals for mining families, which Daniel posted at the general store and the sheriff's office. She drafted a careful advertisement for the Redstone Gazette, announcing the Whistling Kettle's first prize recognition in the territorial culinary competition. And if, as she worked late into the night preparing bread dough and chopping vegetables for the stew, her thoughts occasionally drifted to Bradley Morgan and what might have been, she promptly redirected them toward what was and what could still be. A successful eatery built on honest work and genuine skill, serving the community that had supported her family through good times and bad. The Whistling Kettle would survive, with or without Bradley Morgan's presence in her life. Kendra Tompkins, daughter of Joseph and Margaret Tompkins, would ensure it, even if part of her heart remained behind at the mansion on the hill. The Denver investors' meeting concluded more satisfactorily than Bradley had dared hope. Winchester, impressed by the detailed documentation Bradley had prepared and the undeniable success of initial tests, agreed to fund full implementation of the new processing method. Even Richard Harrington, whose unexpected presence had initially seemed designed to undermine Bradley's proposal, ultimately offered qualified support, along with a subtle suggestion of potential partnership that Bradley filed away for future consideration. Business concluded, Bradley should have felt triumphant. Instead, as his stallion carried him back toward Redstone Ridge through the late afternoon shadows, a curious emptiness accompanied each mile he covered. The investment secured for the mine's expansion should have occupied his thoughts, yet his mind continually circled back to Kendra's letter, read and reread until its contents were committed to memory. Her explanation had been straightforward. The Whistling Kettle's financial troubles, the landlord's ultimatum, her desperate need to earn enough to preserve her parents' legacy. No excuses or justifications, simply the plain facts of her situation and the choice she had made to secure the position in his household. She had acknowledged the deception without minimizing its significance, expressing regret not for the initial embellishment, but for maintaining it even as their relationship evolved beyond employer and employee. I should have trusted you with the truth, she had written in a passage that haunted him still. Not because you were my employer, but because you had become someone whose good opinion mattered more than any position or wage. By the time I recognized this truth, I feared the revelation would destroy whatever was growing between us. Ironic that in trying to preserve your regard, I ensured its loss. The simple dignity of her words, the absence of recrimination or plea for reconsideration, stood in stark contrast to his own hasty dismissal. He had acted from wounded pride rather than measured judgment, allowing Martha and Cecilia's orchestrated humiliation to color his response to a deception that, viewed objectively, had harmed no one and had been motivated by desperate circumstances rather than malicious intent. His moral high ground, so certain the night of the ball, had eroded steadily since reading Kendra's letter and hearing Martha's confession about Eleanor. Now, as Redstone Ridge appeared on the horizon, Bradley found himself questioning not just his handling of Kendra's deception, but his entire approach to relationships since Eleanor's departure. Martha had been right about one thing, though he was loath to admit it. He had retreated into the safety of business concerns, avoiding genuine connection out of fear of further betrayal, until Kendra, with her quiet competence and unexpected warmth, had slipped past his defenses without even trying. A fork in the road presented itself, right toward the Morgan estate, left toward town. Bradley hesitated, then guided his stallion left. There was a stop he needed to make before returning home, a conversation long overdue if he was to move forward with clarity rather than lingering resentment. The Harrington house stood on Redstone Ridge's more fashionable west side, a modest but elegant structure that reflected its owner's Eastern tastes. Bradley handed his reins to the groom, who appeared at his approach, removing his hat as he mounted the steps to the front door. Eleanor herself answered his knock, her composed features registering momentary surprise before her social training reasserted itself. "Bradley, this is unexpected." "Forgive the intrusion," he said formally, suddenly uncertain of his purpose now that he faced her directly. "I wondered if we might speak privately." Something flickered in Eleanor's blue eyes. Wariness, perhaps, or curiosity? "Richard is still in Denver. He sent word he'll be delayed another day." She hesitated, then stepped back from the doorway. "Please, come in." The parlor reflected Eleanor's refined sensibilities. Tasteful furniture arranged for conversation rather than show, fresh flowers in simple vases, books and needlework suggesting actual use rather than mere decoration. She gestured toward an armchair while seating herself on the sofa opposite. "I must admit, after the Easter ball, I didn't expect to see you again before our departure," she observed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I can only imagine what you must think of me, standing silent while Martha and that Winthrop woman humiliated your friend." The hesitation before friend revealed Eleanor's uncertainty about how to categorize Kendra's relationship to Bradley, an uncertainty he shared if he was honest with himself. "I didn't come to discuss the ball," Bradley replied, though the memory of Kendra's pale face as her deception was exposed publicly still rankled. "I came about our past, about why you returned my ring 3 years ago." Eleanor inhaled sharply, color rising in her cheeks. "Why revisit old wounds, Bradley? What's done is done. Is it?" Bradley leaned forward, studying her face with new perception. "For 3 years, I've believed you left me for Richard Harrington's wealth and position, that what we shared meant less to you than the advantages he offered. I've carried that belief like a stone in my chest, Eleanor. I'd like to set it down at last." Something in his tone must have conveyed the importance of this conversation, for Eleanor's carefully maintained composure softened into more genuine expression. "What brought this on now, after all this time?" "Perspective," Bradley answered simply, "and a recent conversation with Martha that suggested there might have been more to your decision than I understood." At Martha's name, Eleanor's eyes widened fractionally. "What did she tell you?" "That she convinced you I would be better off without you. That she manipulated your feelings to achieve her own ends." Bradley watched Eleanor's face closely, seeing confirmation in her averted gaze. "What I want to know is why you believed her." Eleanor was silent for a long moment, staring at her clasped hands. When she finally spoke, her voice held none of the practiced confidence he remembered. "I was never truly comfortable in Boston society, Bradley. My father was a schoolteacher, my mother a milliner. Respectable, but hardly the background your family was accustomed to. Martha made me acutely aware of every social misstep, every inappropriate word choice, every fashion decision that marked me as an outsider." "Martha can be exacting," Bradley acknowledged, remembering his sister's critical assessments of Eleanor's deportment and conversation. "But I never cared about those things." "I know," Eleanor said softly. "That was part of what Martha used against me. She said your blindness to my social inadequacies would fade once we were married, that eventually you would resent me for holding back your advancement in Boston society." She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "She said if I truly loved you, I would step aside and allow you to find a wife worthy of the Morgan name and fortune." The manipulation was so perfectly calibrated to Eleanor's insecurities and genuine affection for him that Bradley felt a fresh surge of anger toward Martha, despite her recent contrition. "And you believed her." "I was young and uncertain of my place in your world," Eleanor admitted, "and Martha was very convincing. She presented it as a sacrifice for your happiness, a noble gesture rather than abandonment." A sad smile touched her lips. "By the time I realized the magnitude of my mistake, you had left Boston and Richard had begun his courtship. Pride prevented me from admitting I'd been manipulated, so I accepted his proposal and tried to convince myself it was for the best." "And now?" Bradley asked, genuinely curious about her life with the man she had chosen over him. Are you happy with Richard? Eleanor considered the question with unexpected frankness. Richard is a good man in his way. He's kind, generous with material things, and we share similar interests in music and literature. She hesitated, then added with painful honesty, but we lack the connection you and I had, the sense of being truly seen and understood. I've made peace with that absence, most days. The admission, delivered without self-pity or expectation, touched Bradley deeply. Here was the Eleanor he had loved. Forthright, reflective, capable of acknowledging truth without dramatics. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," he said simply. "Sorry that Martha's interference cost us both so much." "Are you?" she asked, studying his face with surprising perception. "If things had proceeded as originally planned, you would never have come to Redstone Ridge, never built the mine into what it is today, never met your Miss Tompkins." "Kendra?" he corrected automatically, the name like honey and whiskey on his tongue. "Kendra?" Eleanor echoed, a genuine smile lighting her features. "You love her, don't you? Despite the deception Martha was so eager to expose." Bradley started to deny it, to retreat behind qualifications and conditions, but found the words dying unspoken. What was the point of continued self-deception? "Yes," he admitted, the simple syllable containing multitudes. "Though I've handled the situation badly, I fear." "Wounded pride," Eleanor diagnosed with unexpected accuracy. "Always your particular vulnerability, Bradley. You'd forgive genuine malice more readily than a blow to yourself prima as the honorable, straightforward Morgan son." The insight from someone who had indeed known him well once struck uncomfortably close to home. "She deceived me from our first meeting." "As did I, in a way," Eleanor pointed out gently. "I allowed you to believe I left because I preferred Richard, when in truth I left because Martha convinced me it was best for you." Which deception cut deeper, Bradley? And which is more easily understood? The parallel to Martha's earlier question was so striking that Bradley fell silent, absorbing the implications. Both women had acted from what they believed was love, albeit misguided, Eleanor accepting Martha's manipulation out of concern for his future happiness, Kendra concealing her true circumstances out of desperate need to save her family's legacy. "You've given me much to consider," he said, finally rising from his chair. "Thank you for your honesty, Eleanor. It was overdue on both our parts, perhaps." "We can't reclaim the past," Eleanor replied, walking with him to the door, "but perhaps we can learn from it and make wiser choices going forward." She paused, her hand on the latch. "Don't wait 3 years to resolve matters with Kendra, Bradley. Pride is cold comfort on winter night." With that parting wisdom, she showed him out, standing on the porch as he mounted his stallion. The afternoon sun caught her golden hair, briefly illuminating her with the radiance he remembered from their courtship days. But the ache he might have expected at this reminder of what they had lost was notably absent, replaced by a curious sense of closure and completion. Eleanor belonged to his past, a cherished memory, but no longer an open wound. His future, if he hadn't destroyed its possibility through hasty judgment, might lie with a woman whose honesty came not from flawless conduct, but from the courage to acknowledge her flaws and seek forgiveness for them. The main street of Redstone Ridge bustled with late afternoon activity as Bradley rode toward the east side where the Whistling Kettle stood. Miners coming off shift, shopkeepers arranging their Easter Monday displays, women hurrying to complete last-minute errands before supper, all represented the community that had grown around his father's initial silver strike and his own expansion of the mine. A community that included Kendra Tompkins, daughter of the man who had once opposed his father's water rights acquisition, owner of a modest eatery that served honest food to hardworking people. A woman who had entered his household under false pretenses, but had transformed it through genuine care and unexpected warmth. The Whistling Kettle came into view, its freshly washed windows gleaming in the late afternoon sun. A hand-lettered sign in the front window caught Bradley's attention. Free Easter Monday meals for mining families affected by reduced shifts, served from noon until supplies last. Whistling Kettle, K. Tompkins. Proprietor, the simple generosity of the gesture, at a time when Kendra's own financial situation must be precarious, struck Bradley forcefully. This was the woman he had dismissed with cold formality, whose deception he had judged so harshly while overlooking the character revealed in her every action since joining his household. He dismounted, securing his horse to the hitching post, and approached the door with uncharacteristic hesitation. The closed sign hung in the window, but movement within suggested someone was present. Bradley raised his hand to knock, then paused as he caught sight of Kendra through the window. She moved about the dining room with graceful efficiency, arranging tables with fresh cloths and simple wildflower centerpieces. Her hair was loosely pinned back, tendrils escaping to frame her face as she worked. She wore a simple calico dress rather than the kitchen uniform she'd adopted in his household, yet she seemed no less dignified for the modest attire. In fact, seeing her in her own establishment, confidently preparing for tomorrow's charitable offering despite her recent humiliation and dismissal, Bradley recognized something he'd glimpsed during their brief time together but had never fully acknowledged. Kendra Tompkins possessed a quiet strength and integrity that had nothing to do with social position or formal credentials. She had deceived him about her background, yes, but in every way that truly mattered. In her cooking, in her kindness to his staff, in her respectful handling of Martha's difficult demands, in her genuine interest in his mining operations, she had revealed her true self, and he, blinded by pride and an excessive reverence for rigid honesty, had failed to recognize the more important truth standing before him until it was nearly too late. Bradley raised his hand to knock on the door, not yet certain what he would say, but knowing with sudden clarity that if he didn't attempt to bridge the gulf his hasty dismissal had created, he would regret it for far longer than he had regretted Eleanor's departure. Before his knuckles connected with the wood, however, Daniel Tompkins appeared from the kitchen, saying something that made Kendra laugh, a genuine, unguarded sound that carried faintly through the glass. The siblings conferred briefly, then began extinguishing lamps and preparing to close for the night. Bradley stepped back from the door, abruptly uncertain. To intrude now, without preparation or clear purpose, might only disrupt Kendra's evident determination to move forward with her life. He needed time to consider his approach, to determine what he truly wanted to offer. Apology, reconciliation, or something more significant than either. Tomorrow. He would return tomorrow during the Easter Monday meal service, when his presence might seem less intrusive and Kendra would be surrounded by the community that clearly meant so much to her. Perhaps then he might find the right words to acknowledge his own failings and ask, not for her return to his household, but for the chance to explore what might exist between them without the barriers of employer and employee. With that resolution in mind, Bradley mounted his stallion and turned toward home, the sunset gilding Redstone Ridge in hues of gold and promise. For the first time since the Easter ball, he felt a sense of lightness, not the empty triumph of righteous judgment, but the genuine relief of recognizing a path forward that might lead to reconciliation and, perhaps, redemption. Martha and Josephine would be waiting for his report on the investors' meeting. The new processing method would require immediate implementation if they were to meet Winchester's production targets. Business matters demanded his attention, as always, but as he guided his horse up the winding road toward the Morgan estate, Bradley found his thoughts returning to a simple eatery on the east side of town and to the woman whose absence had revealed just how completely she had claimed a place in his life. And in his heart, Chapter 9. Easter Renewal. More coffee, Mr. Jenkins? Kendra balanced a steaming pot in one hand and a plate of fresh biscuits in the other as she navigated between the crowded tables of the Whistling Kettle. Every seat was filled, with more miners and their families waiting patiently on the boardwalk outside. "Don't mind if I do, Miss Tompkins." The hotel clerk held out his cup with a grateful smile. "Haven't had coffee this good since you closed up shop. The hotel cook's idea of proper brewing would strip paint off a barn door." Kendra poured the rich, dark liquid with practiced ease, glancing around the busy dining room with a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. When she'd posted the notice offering free Easter Monday meals, she'd expected perhaps a dozen mining families to accept. Instead, it seemed half of Redstone Ridge had appeared, many insisting on paying despite her protests that the meal was offered freely. Your pa would be proud, Sheriff Taylor commented as Kendra passed his table, where he sat with his wife and young son. Joseph Tompkins believed in taking care of his own, and you're carrying on that tradition right fine. Thank you, Sheriff. The simple acknowledgement of her father's values meant more to Kendra than elaborate compliments about her cooking or congratulations on the territorial prize. Joseph Tompkins had been many things. Stubborn, occasionally difficult, fiercely independent, but his commitment to the mining community had never wavered, even during the lean years. Daniel appeared from the kitchen, his shirt sleeves rolled up and a streak of flour across one cheek. Need another batch of biscuits, he announced, surveying the crowded room with obvious satisfaction. And we're running low on that apple pie. There's another in the warming oven, Kendra replied, handing him the coffee pot. Would you mind seeing to the tables by the window while I check on the stew? As she turned toward the kitchen, the door opened to admit 3 more miners, still wearing their work clothes, their faces bearing the distinctive grime of a shift underground. They paused uncertainly in the doorway, noting the crowded dining room. Come in, gentlemen, Kendra called over her shoulder. We'll find room for you at the counter. Didn't mean to intrude, Miss Tompkins, the oldest of the 3 said, removing his hat respectfully. Just heard you was offering a meal for them on reduced shifts, and Cooper Mine cut us back to 3 days a week starting today. Cooper Mine? Kendra frowned. I thought Mr. Morgan's new processing method allowed for full operations despite the drought. Morgan Silver, yes, the miner clarified. But Cooper's a smaller operation, miss. Can't afford the fancy new equipment like Morgan can, so we're feeling the pinch something fierce. Kendra's heart sank at this news of further hardship spreading through the mining community. For every wealthy mine owner like Bradley Morgan, a dozen smaller operations struggled to remain profitable during difficult times. And for every owner who cut back shifts, dozens of families faced reduced circumstances. Well, you've come to the right place, she said firmly, gesturing toward the counter. Beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for all 3 of you on the house today in honor of Easter. As she retreated to the kitchen for another batch of biscuits, Kendra couldn't help reflecting on how her perspective had shifted since her return from the Morgan estate. The mansion on the hill with its elegant furnishings and formal dinners now seemed like a distant dream compared to the immediate needs of the community surrounding her. Yet Bradley Morgan remained present in her thoughts, a persistent ache that flared whenever she glimpsed a tall, dark-haired man on the street or caught the scent of the bay rum cologne he favored. She had survived heartbreak before, would survive this one too, but the recovery seemed slower, the wound deeper than expected. The kitchen provided temporary refuge from such thoughts. Kendra lost herself in the familiar routine of checking the stew, removing golden biscuits from the oven, and slicing the last apple pie into generous portions. The prize money from the territorial competition had allowed her to stock the Whistling Kettle's pantry fully, ensuring no one would leave hungry on this Easter Monday. When she returned to the dining room with a fresh basket of biscuits, she found the atmosphere had shifted slightly. The normal buzz of conversation had hushed, with heads turned toward a table near the back where Mrs. Hollister, wife of the Morgan estate's gardener, was speaking earnestly to several miners' wives. Never seen the like of it, Mrs. Hollister was saying as Kendra approached close enough to hear. Miss Martha and that Winthrop woman deliberately cutting up a beautiful ball gown just to prevent Miss Tompkins from attending with Mr. Bradley. If Mr. Hollister hadn't overheard them gloating about it afterward, we'd never have known the depths of their spite. Kendra nearly dropped the biscuit basket. How had Mrs. Hollister learned of the dress sabotage? Only Josephine and Mrs. Winters had witnessed the aftermath, and neither seemed likely to gossip about Morgan family matters. Begging your pardon, Mrs. Hollister, she interrupted, setting the biscuits on the table with careful precision. I'm not sure such matters are appropriate mealtime conversation. The older woman flushed, clearly embarrassed at being overheard. I meant no disrespect, Miss Tompkins. It's just that the household staff at the Morgan estate were right fond of you. Seems a shame you were treated so poorly after bringing such warmth to that cold mansion. Mr. Morgan had every right to dismiss me, Kendra replied quietly, conscious of the curious ears around them. I wasn't entirely forthcoming about my background when I applied for the position. Pshaw. Mrs. Hollister waved away this admission. As if running the finest eatery in Redstone Ridge wasn't qualification enough. Mr. Bradley's just too proud for his own good, always has been, takes after his father that way. One of the miners' wives, a thin woman with careworn features, reached over to pat Kendra's hand. "Don't you fret, Miss Tompkins. We all know your worth here. My Jim says the days you were closed were the hungriest days since we came to Redstone Ridge. Nobody makes a stew stretches farther or fills the belly better." Murmurs of agreement rose from surrounding tables, warming Kendra's cheeks and heart simultaneously. These people, miners, shopkeepers, laborers, had known her all her life, had watched her grow from Joseph Tompkins' headstrong daughter to a woman who could run her own establishment with quiet efficiency. Their good opinion mattered more than she had realized during her brief sojourn among the wealthy. "You're very kind," she managed, blinking back unexpected tears. "Now, who needs more coffee?" The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity. As word spread about the free meals, more mining families appeared, along with several elderly residents whose fixed incomes had been stretched thin by rising prices. Kendra and Daniel worked steadily, serving stew and biscuits until the last pot was scraped empty and the final apple pie divided among a group of wide-eyed children. By late afternoon, only a few lingerers remained. Sheriff Taylor nursing a final cup of coffee, Mrs. Peterson and Mrs. Hollister deep in conversation by the window, and a grizzled old prospector who had fallen asleep in the corner booth, his weathered hat pulled low over his eyes. Daniel collapsed onto a chair near the counter, wiping his brow with a dishcloth. "I'd forgotten how much work this place is," he admitted with a tired grin. "Though I can't complain about the results. People were genuinely happy to see the kettle open again." Yes, they were. Kendra began gathering dirty dishes, her own exhaustion tempered by satisfaction. The prize money should keep us going for several months at least, especially with the number of customers who insisted on paying today despite our free meal offer. About that, Daniel hesitated, then forged ahead. Jenkins mentioned the Central City position again when he was leaving. Said the hotel owner is willing to wait a week for our answer, but no longer. The reminder of potential relocation dampened Kendra's spirits. "Let's not make any decisions yet," she suggested, stacking plates with careful precision. "Today proved there's still demand for the whistling kettle in Redstone Ridge. Perhaps we could make it work here after all." Daniel studied her face with the perception born of shared hardship and history. "This isn't about the kettle's prospects, is it? It's about him." There was no need to specify which him Daniel meant. Kendra kept her gaze fixed on the dishes, unwilling to reveal how accurately her brother had read her hesitation. "Redstone Ridge is our home," she said finally. "Leaving should be a last resort, not a first response to difficulty." "And if he comes back?" Daniel asked quietly. "If Bradley Morgan appears at that door tomorrow or next week or next month, what then, Ken?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was prepared to voice aloud. Kendra had no ready answer, had deliberately avoided contemplating such a possibility since her return to town. She was saved from responding by a sharp knock at the front door. Both siblings turned to see Josephine Morgan peering through the glass, her expression a mixture of determination and anxiety. "Speaking of the Morgans," Daniel muttered, rising reluctantly to admit their unexpected visitor. "Josephine!" Kendra wiped her hands on her apron, smoothing back loose strands of hair with self-conscious haste. "This is a surprise. We're actually closed now, but I could make fresh coffee if you'd like." "No, thank you." Josephine stepped inside, her tailored riding habit suggesting she had come directly from the Morgan estate. "I can't stay long. Martha's expecting me for dinner, and while she's shown remarkable improvement lately, her patience still has limits." "Improvement?" Daniel echoed skeptically. The Martha Morgan I remember from the Easter ball seemed perfectly comfortable orchestrating public humiliation. "Daniel," Kendra admonished, though she couldn't entirely fault his assessment. Josephine, however, merely nodded. "You're not wrong. Martha's behavior at the ball was inexcusable, but circumstances have shifted since then." She glanced at Daniel, then back to Kendra. "Might we speak privately for a moment?" Daniel raised his hands in surrender. "Say no more. I'll finish cleaning the kitchen while you ladies chat." He disappeared through the swinging door, though Kendra suspected he wouldn't stray beyond easy eavesdropping distance. Josephine waited until Daniel was gone before speaking again, her voice dropping to ensure only Kendra could hear. "Bradley returned from Denver late last night. The investors approved his new processing method. full funding, immediate implementation. That's wonderful news, Kendra said sincerely, pushing aside the small pang that accompanied any mention of Bradley's name. The mine means everything to him, does it? Josephine studied Kendra's face with disconcerting intensity. A month ago, I would have agreed without hesitation, but lately, I'm not so certain the mine holds first place in my brother's affections. Josephine, Kendra began, a warning note in her voice. He came to town yesterday, Josephine interrupted, her words tumbling out as if she feared losing her courage. To the Whistling Kettle. But you were closing up, and he hesitated. Left without making his presence known. The revelation struck Kendra like a physical blow. Bradley had come to the kettle? Had been close enough to see her through the windows, yet had departed without speaking? What did that mean? Why are you telling me this? She asked, when she could trust her voice again. Because my brother is stubborn, proud, and entirely too committed to his own notion of proper conduct, Josephine replied with surprising heat. He read your letter, Kendra. He understands why you did what you did. But his pride still smarts from the public revelation, and he's afraid. Afraid of what? Kendra prompted when Josephine hesitated. Of being wrong. Of admitting the depth of his feelings for you. Of risking his heart again after Eleanor's rejection. Josephine reached out to grasp Kendra's hands impulsively. He's coming to town today for the Easter Monday celebration. Martha and I practically forced him out the door, told him the miners would expect to see him after the investor's positive decision. Kendra's pulse quickened despite her attempt to remain composed. What does this have to do with me? Bradley made his feelings quite clear when he dismissed me. Did he? Josephine's smile held a touch of her usual mischief. If so, he's been remarkably morose for a man who made the right decision. Martha caught him reading your letter again just this morning, and he's been absolutely insufferable company since your departure, snapping at the staff, writing at all hours, staring out windows like some gothic hero from Mrs. Shelley's novels. Despite everything, a small, treacherous hope flickered in Kendra's chest. She ruthlessly extinguished it. Even if what you say is true, nothing has changed. I'm still Joseph Tompkins's daughter, still the owner of a struggling eatery with no social standing or connections. Bradley Morgan deserves a wife who can advance his interests, not complicate them. That sounds remarkably like Martha talking, Josephine observed shrewdly. The same Martha who convinced Eleanor to leave Bradley for his own good. The same Martha whose own marriage is dissolving because she prioritized appropriate connections over genuine affection. Martha's marriage is failing? Kendra couldn't disguise her surprise. The elder Morgan sister had always seemed the embodiment of proper Boston wifehood, secure in her social position and marital status. Edward has filed for divorce, Josephine confirmed, her expression sobering. The papers arrived Easter morning. It's left Martha reevaluating many of her rigid beliefs about suitable matches and proper conduct, including her treatment of you. Kendra absorbed this information in stunned silence. Martha Morgan? Admitting error? The very idea seemed as improbable as snow in July. I should go, Josephine said, glancing at the clock above the counter. But, Kendra, her expression softened with genuine concern. When Bradley comes, and he will come, try to see beyond his pride to the man beneath. He's not perfect, but he loves more deeply than most realize, including himself. With that enigmatic parting, Josephine squeezed Kendra's hands once more and departed, leaving behind a faint scent of lavender and far more questions than answers. Daniel emerged from the kitchen as the bell above the door jingled Josephine's departure. Well, he prompted, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. What did the youngest Morgan want? Kendra turned away, busying herself with the remaining dishes to hide her confused emotions. Just to thank us for the free meals for the mining families, and to let me know Bradley approved the new processing method, which should mean more consistent work for the miners going forward. If Daniel recognized this as less than the whole truth, he had the wisdom not to press. Instead, he simply nodded and began helping her stack the clean plates, his presence a steady comfort amid the turmoil of her thoughts. Outside, the late afternoon sun gilded Redstone Ridge in hues of gold and amber, casting long shadows across the main street. Easter Monday was drawing to a close, the promise of renewal that had accompanied the holiday morning now tempered by the reality of work resuming tomorrow. Miners returning to shortened shifts, shopkeepers facing another week of drought-reduced commerce, the Whistling Kettle reopening to uncertain patronage despite today's successful charity offering. Yet something had shifted within Kendra as she contemplated Josephine's revelations. A door she had believed firmly closed now stood slightly ajar, admitting a sliver of light and possibility where before there had been only resignation and regret. Whether she would or should step through that doorway remained to be seen. "This is absurd," Bradley muttered as he fastened the buttons of his vest with more force than necessary. "The miners don't need to see me today. The processing equipment won't arrive for another week at least." "Nevertheless, your presence in town would be appropriate," Martha replied from where she sat by his study window, her needlework providing an excuse for her unexpected visit to his chambers. "The Easter Monday celebration is an important tradition, especially this year with so many families facing reduced circumstances." Bradley shot his sister a skeptical glance. Since her confession about Eleanor and the arrival of her husband's divorce papers, Martha had shown unprecedented interest in the welfare of Redstone Ridge's working families. Whether this represented genuine change or merely a new strategy, he remained uncertain. "I fail to see why my attendance is suddenly crucial," he persisted, selecting a tie from the array laid out by his valet. "The Morgan Mining Company has already committed to maintaining full shifts despite the drought, and the free meals at the company dining hall provide for our workers adequately. The free meals at the Whistling Kettle, however, extend to all mining families, regardless of which operation employs them," Josephine observed from the doorway, her arrival unannounced but not unwelcome. "Quite a generous gesture from someone whose own circumstances must be rather precarious at present." Bradley's fingers stilled on his tie, his sister's casual mention of Kendra's establishment striking nerves still raw, despite his attempts to move forward. "Miss Tompkins has always shown admirable concern for those less fortunate," he said carefully, resuming his dressing with deliberate precision. "It's a quality I respected in her." "Past tense?" Josephine inquired innocently, moving further into the room to perch on the edge of his bed. "Has your respect diminished since her departure?" "Josephine," Martha warned, though without her usual sharpness. "Bradley's feelings regarding Miss Tompkins are his own concern." "Are they?" Josephine challenged, her tone light but her eyes serious as they met Bradley's in the mirror. "When those feelings affect his judgment, his temperament, and by extension the entire household, I think not." Bradley turned to face his younger sister directly. "You overstep, Josie." "Someone must," she replied, unintimidated by his stern expression. "You've been like a bear with a thorn in its paw since Kendra left. The staff walks on eggshells around you, the foreman reports you've been scrutinizing every minor detail at the mine as if searching for flaws, and even Martha admits you've been poor company." "Josephine exaggerates," Martha interjected, setting aside her needlework with a sigh. "But not entirely without cause. You have been unusually withdrawn since Easter." Bradley paced to the window, gazing out at the mountains that had become his refuge and domain since leaving Boston society. "I've had much on my mind. The Denver investors, the new processing method, your situation with Edward." He trailed off, unwilling to admit how often his thoughts had circled back to Kendra, despite these legitimate concerns. "All true," Martha acknowledged, her voice gentler than he could remember in years. "Yet I suspect those matters would weigh less heavily if you weren't also carrying the burden of regret regarding Miss Tompkins." "Regret?" Bradley echoed, turning to face his sister with raised eyebrows. "You, who orchestrated her public humiliation at the Easter ball, now suggest I should regret dismissing her?" Martha had the grace to look discomfited. "I behaved abominably that night," she admitted, surprising Bradley with her candor. "My actions were calculated to cause maximum embarrassment, driven by my own rigid notions of suitable connections and proper conduct." "Notions you've suddenly abandoned?" Bradley couldn't keep the skepticism from his tone. "Not abandoned," Martha corrected thoughtfully. "Rather, reassessed in light of recent events." She smoothed her skirts, a gesture Bradley recognized as her method of gathering composure before difficult admissions. "Edward's letter was quite illuminating regarding the consequences of prioritizing social position over genuine affection. Bradley studied his elder sister's face, noting the new lines of strain around her eyes and mouth. Whatever Edward had written must have struck deeply to pierce Martha's usual armor of propriety and position. "I still maintain Miss Tompkins deceived me," he said after a moment, returning to the matter at hand. "She invented credentials, fabricated experiences, and maintained the deception even as her acquaintance deepened." "All true," Josephine agreed readily. "And you once withheld inventory figures from investors during the initial mine expansion, claiming production capacities that hadn't yet been achieved, but which you were confident would materialize." Bradley stared at his younger sister, startled by this unexpected parallel. "That was business strategy, not personal deception. I knew the figures would be accurate once the new shaft was completed." "And Kendra knew her cooking skills were genuine even if her formal training was embellished," Josephine countered. "The motivation differs, but the principle remains. Sometimes circumstances require presenting the most advantageous version of facts, particularly when one's livelihood is at stake." "Josephine has a point," Martha added unexpectedly. "Before condemning Miss Tompkins outright, perhaps consider whether you yourself have always maintained perfect transparency in all your dealing." Bradley's immediate impulse was to reject this comparison outright, but honesty, the very quality he valued so highly in others, forced him to acknowledge certain parallels he had previously avoided contemplating. He had indeed presented optimistic projections to investors, had occasionally exaggerated production capabilities to secure necessary financing, had employed strategic ambiguity when describing certain mining techniques to potential competitors, always justified by business necessity, of course. But was Kendra's desperate attempt to secure employment that might save her family's legacy fundamentally different? "Your silence suggests reflection," Martha observed, her tone holding none of its usual certainty. "A quality I might have benefited from exercising more frequently myself." The unusual humility in his proud sister's voice reinforced Bradley's own sense that something fundamental had shifted in their family dynamics since Easter morning. Martha's confession about Eleanor, her unexpected contrition regarding Kendra's public humiliation, her willingness to acknowledge her own failings, all suggested a vulnerability he had never associated with his formidable elder sister. "I visited Eleanor yesterday," he said abruptly, watching Martha's face closely. "We had a long overdue conversation about the circumstances surrounding our broken engagement." Martha paled slightly but held his gaze. "I see. And did you find the closure you sought?" "Surprisingly, yes." Bradley moved to sit in the armchair opposite his sister's, suddenly weary of maintaining formal postures. "Eleanor has made her peace with the choices that led her to Richard Harrington. I find I've made mine as well." "And Kendra?" Josephine prompted gently. "Have you made peace with her departure as well?" The question struck at the heart of the disquiet that had plagued Bradley since Easter morning. "I'm not certain peace is the right word," he admitted, the words coming more easily now that he had begun. "I understand her motivations better after reading her letter. The whistling kettle represented her parents' legacy, all she had left of them. Faced with its imminent loss, she made a desperate choice I might well have made myself in similar circumstances." "Yet you dismissed her without opportunity for explanation," Martha noted, though without judgment. "Might that decision have been influenced more by wounded pride than by the actual severity of her deception?" Bradley laughed humorlessly. "When did you become Kendra Tompkins's advocate, Martha? Last I recall, you were orchestrating her public humiliation with considerable zeal." "A mistake I deeply regret," Martha replied with unexpected sincerity. "Out of many I've made in the name of preserving what I believed was proper and necessary for this family." The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with implications for decisions yet unmade. Bradley rose, moving restlessly to the window once more. The afternoon light had shifted, casting long shadows across the estate grounds, reminding him that Easter Monday was advancing while he remained closeted with his sisters, debating matters of heart and conscience. "I rode into town yesterday," he admitted finally, his back still turned to his siblings. "To the Whistling Kettle. Kendra was there, preparing for today's charity offering." "And?" Josephine prompted when he fell silent. "And I left without making my presence known." Bradley turned back to face them, his expression troubled. She seemed settled already, focused on her establishment, working alongside her brother, moving forward with her life, as one must, when given no other choice, Martha observed quietly. When Eleanor left you, did you not throw yourself into the mine's operations with similar determination? External composure rarely reflects internal peace, Bradley. Josephine rose, moving to stand beside her brother at the window. You're afraid, she said with characteristic directness. Not of Kendra's deception or its potential reflection on your judgment, but of what acknowledging your feelings for her might require of you. And what might that be? Bradley asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Vulnerability, Martha supplied unexpectedly. The willingness to risk your heart and your pride on a connection that defies conventional wisdom and social expectation. Her voice took on a reflective quality Bradley had rarely heard from his practical sister. The courage to choose personal happiness over position and propriety. Bradley studied Martha's face, recognizing the shadow of regret that occasionally crossed her features when she believed herself unobserved. Had her own rigid adherence to social expectations cost her the possibility of genuine connection with Edward? Had her determination to maintain the Morgan position in Boston society ultimately undermined the very marriage that should have secured it? I'm afraid it may be too late, he admitted, voicing the concern that had kept him from Kendra's door the previous day. My dismissal was uncompromising. And she has her establishment to consider, her brother, her life in Redstone Ridge. Only one way to determine that with certainty, Josephine pointed out practically. Today's Easter Monday celebration provides the perfect opportunity for a casual encounter that might open the door to further conversation. Bradley raised an eyebrow at his younger sister's transparent scheming. You've given this considerable thought, I see. Someone must, she replied cheerfully. You're too proud, Martha's too recently converted to the cause of true affection over proper matches, and Kendra's too hurt and uncertain to make the first overture. Josephine has a point, Martha conceded. Moreover, your presence in town today would demonstrate the Morgan family's continued investment in Redstone Ridge's welfare, particularly after the investors' approval of the new processing method. It would be appropriate? Bradley recognized the olive branch Martha was extending, framing his potential reconciliation with Kendra in terms of business propriety and community obligation rather than emotional necessity. It was as close to explicit approval as his proper Boston sister was likely to offer. Very well, he conceded, adjusting his tie with renewed purpose. I'll ride into town for the Easter Monday celebration, but I make no promises regarding Miss Tompkins. The situation is complicated. Life generally is, Martha observed with unexpected philosophy. Something I'm learning rather late, it seems. As Bradley completed his preparations, a curious lightness settled over him. Not the hollow emptiness that had accompanied him since Kendra's departure, but something warmer, more hopeful. Whether that hope would bear fruit remained to be seen, but for the first time since the Easter ball, he felt himself moving forward rather than merely enduring. One last thing, Josephine said as he reached for his hat. Kendra's offering free meals today to families affected by the drought and reduced mining shifts. A gesture of considerable generosity given her own precarious circumstances. Your point? Bradley asked, though he suspected he knew what was coming. Only that actions often reveal more about a person's character than credentials or social position ever could, Josephine replied innocently. Something to consider as you contemplate the relative importance of formal honesty versus genuine goodness. Bradley shot his sister a quelling look, though he couldn't entirely suppress a reluctant smile at her transparent manipulation. Your point is noted, Josie. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I have an Easter Monday celebration to attend. As he descended the stairs, Bradley found himself reviewing the conversations of the past hour from a new perspective. His sister's unexpected alliance, Martha's uncharacteristic humility, Josephine's persistent advocacy for Kendra, all suggested they recognized something in his connection with the forthright cook that he himself had been reluctant to acknowledge. The question remained whether that recognition had come too late, whether his hasty dismissal and wounded pride had irreparably damaged whatever might have grown between them. Kendra's letter had offered explanation without expectation, clarification without plea for reconsideration. Perhaps she had already made peace with their separation, already determined to move forward without him. Only one way to find out, as Josephine had so practically observed. The thought accompanied Bradley as he mounted his stallion and turned toward town, the late afternoon sun warming his shoulders like a benediction as Easter Monday. A day of continued celebration after resurrection's miracle stretched before him with newfound possibility. Late afternoon shadows stretched across Main Street as Bradley Morgan tied his stallion to the hitching post outside the Whistling Kettle. Through the windows, he could see every table occupied, with Daniel Tompkins moving efficiently among the diners, coffee pot in hand. The easy camaraderie between the townsfolk, miners, shopkeepers, and laborers alike created an atmosphere of community that struck Bradley forcefully after the formal isolation of his hillside mansion. He remained outside a moment longer, adjusting his hat and jacket with unconscious precision while gathering his courage. The last time he had stood before this door, he had retreated without making his presence known. Today, retreat was not an option, not if he hoped to address the hollow ache that had accompanied him since Kendra's departure from his household. The bell above the door jingled as Bradley entered, the sound momentarily lost in the cheerful din of conversation and clinking cutlery. Then, like a ripple across still water, awareness of his presence spread through the room. Conversations faltered, faces turned, expressions registered varying degrees of surprise at the appearance of Bradley Morgan, owner of the town's largest silver mine, resident of the mansion on the hill, in this modest eatery on the less fashionable east side of Redstone Ridge. "Mr. Morgan," Sheriff Taylor recovered first, rising from his table with a welcoming nod. "Good to see you in town. Come to celebrate the investors' approval of your new processing method?" "Word travels quickly," Bradley observed, removing his hat as he acknowledged the sheriff's greeting. "Small towns run on silver and gossip," Taylor replied with a knowing smile. "And both flow freely in Redstone Ridge." Bradley's gaze moved past the sheriff, scanning the crowded room until he found what he sought. Kendra, emerging from the kitchen with a large tray balanced expertly on one arm. She wore a simple calico dress beneath a crisp white apron, her chestnut hair pulled back in a practical knot that nonetheless allowed several wayward curls to frame her face. Even in these modest surroundings, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that made the fancy gowns of Boston society women seem like excessive ornament on statues that needed no embellishment. Then she saw him, and the tray wavered almost imperceptibly before her natural composure reasserted itself. Only someone who had observed her closely during their time together would have noticed the momentary lapse, the slight widening of her eyes, the quick intake of breath, the almost invisible straightening of her shoulders as she prepared to face an unexpected challenge. Bradley recognized all these signals, having cataloged each of Kendra's expressions during their shared midnight conversations and rides through his property. The knowledge that he could still read her so clearly after their separation brought an unexpected warmth to his chest. Daniel materialized at his sister's side, taking the tray with a murmured word and a concerned glance toward Bradley. Kendra nodded in response to whatever her brother had said, then squared her shoulders and approached the doorway where Bradley still stood, uncomfortably aware of the curious gazes following her progress. "Mr. Morgan," she greeted him with careful formality. Though her eyes held questions she was too proud to voice aloud. "This is an unexpected honor. Are you here for a late Easter dinner? We're nearly out of everything except coffee and apple pie, I'm afraid." "Actually, I was hoping for a word with you, Miss Tompkins," Bradley replied, equally formal despite the intimacy of their shared history. "At your convenience, of course." Something flickered in Kendra's eyes. Hope, wariness, he couldn't be certain. Before she nodded, "Daniel can manage for a few minutes. Perhaps the back garden would offer more privacy." Without waiting for his response, she untied her apron and hung it on a hook near the kitchen door, then led the way through the busy dining room toward a small door at the rear. Bradley followed, acutely conscious of the speculative glances and hushed comments their passage generated. By tomorrow, all of Redstone Ridge would be buzzing with theories about his appearance at the Whistling Kettle and his private conversation with Kendra Tompkins. Let them talk, he thought with newfound clarity. Some matters transcended concern for gossip or appearance. The back garden was little more than a small patch of ground between the eatery and the alley, but Kendra had transformed it with careful attention. Early spring vegetables grew in neat rows, bordered by clumps of purple and yellow crocuses. An ancient apple tree, gnarled but sturdy, stood in one corner, its branches just beginning to show the pale pink buds that would soon burst into blossom. Kendra stopped beneath the tree, turning to face Bradley with composed features that nevertheless failed to disguise the rapid pulse visible at her throat. "You mentioned wanting a word, Mr. Morgan." "Several words, actually," Bradley replied, struggling to find the right place to begin. All his carefully planned openings seemed inadequate now that he stood before her. "I received your letter," he said finally, deciding directness might serve better than eloquence. "I see." Kendra's expression revealed nothing of her thoughts. "I hope it clarified my circumstances, if nothing else." "It did," Bradley acknowledged, "though I find I needed more than clarification. I owe you an apology, Kendra." Her eyes widened slightly at his use of her given name, but she remained silent, waiting. "My reaction to the revelation of your embellished credentials was driven more by wounded pride than by the actual severity of your deception," Bradley continued, voicing the realization that had come to him during his conversation with Martha and Josephine. "I allowed my embarrassment at being publicly deceived to override my understanding of the desperate circumstances that motivated your choices. You had every right to dismiss me," Kendra replied, her voice steady despite the emotion he sensed beneath her controlled exterior. "I entered your household under false pretenses, allowed you to believe me something I wasn't. And yet in every way that truly mattered, you were exactly as you presented yourself," Bradley countered, taking a step closer. "Your cooking was exceptional, your management of the household impeccable, your character evident in every interaction, not just with me, but with the staff, with my sisters, even with Cecilia at her most trying." A ghost of a smile touched Kendra's lips at this last observation. "Miss Winthrop did present certain challenges. Challenges you met with more grace than I managed when faced with the truth about your background," Bradley acknowledged ruefully. "I reacted like a petulant child whose pride had been wounded, not like a man who had come to—" He hesitated, then forged ahead. "Not like a man who had come to care deeply for the woman behind the credentials." Color rose in Kendra's cheeks, but she maintained her composure. "Mr. Morgan?" "Bradley, while I appreciate your apology, I'm not certain what you hope to accomplish with this conversation. My circumstances haven't changed. I'm still Joseph Tompkins's daughter, still the owner of a modest eatery with no formal training or social position. You're still Bradley Morgan, heir to Boston society expectations, and owner of the richest silver mine in the territory. And yet, I find those differences matter far less to me than they once did," Bradley replied, taking another step closer until barely an arm's length separated them. "Perhaps they never mattered as much as I believed they should. Perhaps I allowed Martha's rigid notions of suitable connections and proper matches to influence my thinking more than I realized." "Martha?" Kendra echoed, a hint of the old wariness returning to her expression. "I understood from Josephine that your sister's circumstances have changed recently." "Edward has filed for divorce," Bradley confirmed, seeing no reason to conceal what would soon be common knowledge. "It's led Martha to reevaluate many of her long-held beliefs about appropriate matches and social obligations, including, somewhat surprisingly, her opinion of you." "I find that difficult to believe," Kendra said, understandable skepticism coloring her tone. "As did I," Bradley admitted with a wry smile. "Yet Martha was among those who encouraged my visit today. She suggested, with unprecedented humility, that perhaps genuine connection might be more valuable than social advantage or business alliance." "Martha Morgan said this?" Kendra's eyebrows rose in genuine astonishment. "The same Martha who orchestrated my public humiliation at the Easter ball?" "The very same," Bradley confirmed, though I believe she would say that Martha was operating from rigid principles that recent events have forced her to reconsider." He paused, then added more seriously, "She's not the only one who has been reconsidering rigid principles lately." Understanding dawned in Kendra's eyes. "You mean your insistence on complete honesty in all dealings? I've come to recognize that I've held others to standards I myself haven't always maintained," Bradley acknowledged. the admission easier now that he had faced it squarely. I presented optimistic projections to investors, occasionally exaggerated production capabilities to secure financing, employed strategic ambiguity when describing certain mining techniques to competitors. He met her gaze directly, always justified by business necessity, of course. But was your attempt to secure employment that might save your family's legacy fundamentally different? I never thought of it that way, Kendra admitted, her posture relaxing slightly as she considered this perspective. Though I still regret not trusting you with the truth once things changed between us. As do I, Bradley agreed quietly. Not trusting you with my feelings when it became clear they had grown beyond mere employee and employee. Pride again, I suppose. The fear of appearing vulnerable after Eleanor's rejection. At the mention of his former fiancée, Kendra's expression clouded. Josephine mentioned you visited Eleanor yesterday. Did you find what you were seeking? Closure primarily, Bradley replied honestly, and perhaps a better understanding of how Martha's interference shaped both our pasts. Eleanor confirmed what Martha had already admitted, that she left not because she preferred Richard Harrington, but because Martha convinced her it was best for my future, just as Martha attempted to convince you that I was unsuitable, Kendra observed with sudden insight. Precisely. Bradley smiled at her quick understanding, though in this case her manipulations proved less successful. I may be stubborn, but even I eventually recognize when I'm making a monumental mistake. Hope flickered across Kendra's features before caution reasserted itself. What mistake would that be? Allowing pride and rigid notions of proper conduct to override what I know in my heart, Bradley replied, closing the remaining distance between them. He reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. Kendra Tompkins, I dismissed you without giving you the opportunity to explain circumstances I might well have understood had I not been blinded by wounded pride. I allowed my embarrassment at being deceived to override the evidence of your character that had been before me every day since you entered my household. For that, I am truly sorry. Kendra's fingers tightened around his, though her expression remained guarded. What exactly are you saying, Bradley? That I miss you, he said simply. Not just your exceptional cooking or your efficient management of the household, but your company. Your perspective on matters both great and small. Your ability to see me as a man, not merely the Morgan mine owner or Boston Society's prodigal son. He gestured toward the busy eatery behind them. Your genuine concern for this community, demonstrated again today with your Easter Monday offering, despite your own uncertain circumstances. The whistling kettle was my parents' legacy, Kendra replied, her voice softening as she spoke of her family. They believed in taking care of their own, even during difficult times, perhaps especially then, a value I've come to appreciate more fully since meeting you, Bradley acknowledged. The mine provides employment, certainly, but true community requires more than economic opportunity. It requires genuine connection, mutual support during hardship, celebration of collective achievement. Values not typically associated with mine owners, Kendra observed, though without rancor. Perhaps not, Bradley agreed, but ones I'd like to embrace more fully going forward. He hesitated, then voiced the question that had brought him to her door. I wondered if you might consider helping me in that endeavor. Kendra studied his face, her practical nature asserting itself despite the emotions he could see warring beneath her composed exterior. In what capacity, exactly? That, Bradley admitted, depends entirely on you. He squeezed her hand gently. I had thought perhaps we might begin with dinner, not at the mansion with all its associated formality, but here at the Whistling Kettle, where you feel most yourself. Or at the hotel dining room if you prefer neutral territory, he smiled slightly. Anywhere that might allow us to explore whatever's growing between us without the complications of employer and employee. People would talk, Kendra warned, though he noted she hadn't withdrawn her hand from his. People already talk, Bradley replied philosophically. About my new processing method, about Martha's husband filing for divorce, about my appearance at your Easter Monday celebration. Perhaps we might give them something worthwhile to discuss for a change. A genuine smile illuminated Kendra's features, transforming her from merely pretty to breathtaking. You've changed, Bradley Morgan. The man who first hired me would never have suggested such a public association with his cook. Former cook, Bradley corrected gently. Current proprietor of the Whistling Kettle and recent recipient of the Territorial Culinary Prize, I understand. Quite an accomplished woman in her own right. Surprise flickered across Kendra's face. How did you know about the prize? I've only told Daniel and Josephine. Small towns run on silver and gossip, Bradley quoted Sheriff Taylor with a smile, and both flow freely in Redstone Ridge. Kendra laughed. The sound as bright and promising as the apple blossoms preparing to burst forth above them. Very well, Mr. Morgan, I accept your invitation to dinner, though I warn you, my standards for proper cooking are exceedingly high. I would expect nothing less, Bradley replied, his heart lighter than it had been since the Easter ball. Tomorrow evening? I understand the Whistling Kettle closes at 6. Tomorrow, Kendra agreed, her eyes holding his with newfound confidence. Though I should warn you, Daniel is likely to be watching from the kitchen window even as we speak, ready to defend my honor should the need arise. Bradley glanced toward the small window above the herb garden, where Daniel's concerned face was indeed visible, making no attempt to disguise his vigilant observation. Your brother's protective instincts do him credit, he said, raising his free hand in a small salute that Daniel grudgingly returned. Though I hope to convince him over time that my intentions toward you are entirely honorable. And what intentions might those be? Kendra asked, a hint of mischief in her tone that reminded Bradley of their easy conversations in his kitchen, before Martha and Cecilia's machinations had complicated everything. To explore whatever exists between us without the barriers of employer and employee, Bradley replied honestly. To learn whether the connection I felt growing during our midnight conversations and rides across my property might develop into something more substantial given the opportunity. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her knuckles, to discover whether Joseph Tompkins's daughter and Jonathan Morgan's son might forge a future neither of our fathers could have imagined, but both might ultimately have approved. Color bloomed in Kendra's cheeks at the gesture, but her eyes remained steady on his. Ambitious goals, Mr. Morgan. I've never been accused of thinking small, Bradley agreed with a smile. Though I'm content to begin with dinner if that suits you better. Dinner seems a reasonable starting point, Kendra allowed, reluctantly withdrawing her hand as the kitchen door opened to reveal Daniel, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. Everything all right out here, Ken? He asked, his protective gaze fixed on Bradley with unmistakable warning. Perfectly fine, Kendra assured him, moving toward the door with evident reluctance. Mr. Morgan was just leaving. He has an early meeting in town tomorrow regarding the new processing equipment. And dinner plans tomorrow evening, Bradley added, nodding respectfully to Daniel. With your sister, if she's available. Daniel's eyebrows rose, but something in Kendra's expression must have communicated her wishes, for he merely nodded stiffly. Reckon that's for Ken to decide, he said finally, though I'll be expecting her home at a reasonable hour. Of course, Bradley agreed, recognizing the protective instinct for what it was. Love, not interference. I wouldn't dream of keeping her out past what propriety allows. As Kendra disappeared inside with her brother, Bradley remained a moment longer in the small garden, absorbing the significance of what had just transpired. He had come seeking forgiveness, perhaps reconciliation, and found instead the possibility of a new beginning, one built on mutual understanding rather than the artificial barriers of employer and employee. Whether that beginning would lead where he hoped remained to be seen. But for the first time since the Easter ball, Bradley felt the weight of regret lifting from his shoulders, replaced by something lighter, more hopeful, as promising as the apple blossoms preparing to burst forth above him. Easter renewal indeed. 2 months later, the apple tree in the Whistling Kettle's back garden had transformed from tentative pink blossoms to lush green foliage, providing welcome shade against the early summer heat. Beneath its spreading branches, Bradley Morgan studied the architectural drawings spread across the rough wooden table, his shirt sleeves rolled up against the June warmth and his customary formality notably absent. The contractor believes we can expand the dining room without disturbing the existing kitchen, he explained, tracing the proposed addition with his finger. Though he recommends upgrading the stove and adding a proper pastry preparation area here. Kendra leaned over his shoulder, her proximity sending a pleasant warmth through Bradley that had nothing to do with the summer afternoon. After 2 months of courtship, conducted with careful attention to propriety, dinners at the hotel dining room, chaperoned rides through town, Sunday walks after church services, such casual closeness still felt like a newly discovered treasure. The pastry area makes sense, she agreed, studying the plans with practical assessment. Though I wonder if we might adjust the dining room configuration to allow more natural light from the west windows. An excellent suggestion. Bradley made a notation on the drawing, adding it to the growing list of refinements they had developed together. Richardson can incorporate it into the final plans before construction begins next week. From inside the whistling kettle came the sounds of the midday rush, clinking dishes, murmured conversations, Daniel's deep voice calling orders to the newly hired kitchen assistant. Business had flourished since Kendra's reopening, with patronage expanding beyond miners and townspeople to include visitors from neighboring settlements and even occasional travelers from Denver. The Territorial Culinary Prize had brought welcome publicity, but Bradley suspected the true draw was the genuine welcome Kendra extended to every guest, regardless of station or circumstance. Unlike many establishments that grew quickly and lost their original character, the Whistling Kettle had maintained its unpretentious warmth while gradually enhancing its offerings and refining its service. Much like its proprietor, Bradley reflected, watching Kendra make additional notes on the architectural drawings. She remained the same forthright, capable woman who had entered his household under false pretenses, yet transformed it through genuine care. But subtle changes marked her evolution. Increased confidence in her decisions, greater willingness to expand her culinary repertoire, a quiet assurance in social situations that once might have intimidated her. "What are you thinking?" Kendra asked, glancing up to find him watching her with a half smile. "That I'm the most fortunate man in Colorado Territory," Bradley replied honestly. "To have found a woman who challenges my assumptions, improves my character, and makes the finest apple dumplings west of the Mississippi." Kendra laughed, the sound as bright and unaffected as it had been the first time he'd heard it in his kitchen. High praise indeed from a man who once employed a cook claiming experience in the territorial governor's kitchen. A cook whose actual skills far exceeded her formal credentials, Bradley countered, reaching for her hand across the table, "as I've had ample opportunity to appreciate these past 2 months." Their fingers intertwined with familiar ease, the casual intimacy still novel enough to bring color to Kendra's cheeks despite their now established courtship. "Speaking of appreciation," she said, changing the subject with transparent effort, "Josephine's arrangements for the dining room have transformed the space entirely. Who would have thought Morgan would have such a talent for interior design?" "Josephine has always had an eye for beauty and function in equal measure," Bradley agreed, allowing her the momentary retreat from more personal topics. "I'm glad she decided to extend her visit rather than returning east with Martha." "Will you miss your elder sister?" Kendra asked, genuine curiosity in her tone. Despite Martha's remarkable transformation since Easter, her relationship with Kendra had remained cordial rather than close. Mutual respect gradually replacing former antagonism without quite developing into genuine warmth. "In some ways," Bradley admitted thoughtfully, "the Martha who emerged after Edward's divorce filing was more reminiscent of the sister I knew before Boston society's expectations hardened her perspectives. But I understand her desire to return east, to rebuild her life with the wisdom she's gained from recent experiences." "And she leaves knowing you're in good hands," Kendra observed with a smile. "So she informed me quite directly yesterday," Bradley replied, recalling his sister's parting words, "along with a rather pointed inquiry about my intentions regarding your future." Kendra's eyes widened. "Martha asked about your intentions? Toward me?" "Indeed." With unprecedented directness, Bradley's thumb traced circles on her palm, a gesture he had discovered invariably distracted her from whatever she had been thinking. She suggested, with remarkable insight for a woman who once considered you entirely unsuitable, that "I would be a fool to let another summer pass without securing my happiness more permanently." Color bloomed across Kendra's cheeks as she absorbed the implication of his words. "And what did you tell her?" That I had already given the matter considerable thought, Bradley replied, fishing in his waistcoat pocket with his free hand, and that I had, in fact, acquired a certain item in anticipation of the right moment presenting itself. Kendra's breath caught as he withdrew a small velvet box from his pocket. Bradley? I had planned something more elaborate, he admitted, suddenly uncertain despite weeks of preparation, perhaps a dinner at the hotel with proper champagne, or a ride to the cliff top where we almost shared our first kiss. But sitting here with you, planning our future together so naturally, it seems the perfect moment has found us instead. He opened the box to reveal a ring unlike any Kendra had likely seen before. Not a traditional diamond solitaire, but an exquisite arrangement of sapphires surrounding a central pearl, set in warm gold, that glowed in the dappled sunlight filtering through the apple leaves. "It's beautiful," she breathed, her free hand rising to cover her mouth. "It was my mother's," Bradley explained, his voice roughening slightly with emotion. "My father commissioned it to match her eyes, the same shade of blue as the Colorado sky on a clear autumn day. She always said it represented their unconventional partnership, a Boston businessman and the daughter of a frontier doctor, building something neither of their families could have imagined, like a silver mine owner and an eatery proprietor," Kendra suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. "Precisely." Bradley rose, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair, a gesture both traditional and entirely unexpected from a man of his position. "Kendra Tompkins, these past 2 months have confirmed what I believe I knew from our first midnight conversation in my kitchen. You are unlike any woman I have ever known. Your strength, your honesty, yes, your fundamental honesty despite our complicated beginning, your kindness, your practical intelligence, all have made me a better man than I was before you entered my life." Kendra's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her hand remained steady in his. "Bradley, I love you," he continued simply, the words all the more powerful for their unadorned directness. "Not despite our different backgrounds or the complications of our beginning, but in part because of them. They have shaped us into who we are, people capable of seeing beyond surface expectations to the truth of what matters." He held up the ring, its blue stones catching the sunlight. "Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" For a moment, Kendra merely looked at him, her expression a complex mixture of joy and lingering disbelief that this moment had actually arrived. Then a radiant smile illuminated her features. "Yes," she said, the simple syllable containing worlds of meaning. "Yes, Bradley Morgan, I will marry you." With hands that weren't entirely steady, Bradley slipped the ring onto her finger, where it settled as if it had been crafted for her alone. Then he rose, drawing her up with him until they stood facing each other beneath the apple tree, the same tree that had witnessed their first tentative reconciliation 2 months earlier. "I believe this calls for a proper seal," he murmured, his hands coming to rest lightly at her waist. "Indeed it does," Kendra agreed, her arms lifting to encircle his neck with newfound confidence. "Though I believe Daniel is watching from the kitchen window again." "Let him watch," Bradley replied, drawing her closer. "I have nothing to hide regarding my intentions toward his sister." Their lips met in a kiss that began with gentle reverence but quickly deepened into something more profound. A promise, a commitment, a bridge between worlds that had once seemed impossibly separate but now converged in perfect harmony. From inside the whistling kettle came the sound of applause and cheers. Daniel had apparently shared the news with the midday patrons, who were expressing their approval with typical frontier directness. Bradley smiled against Kendra's lips before reluctantly ending the kiss. "It seems our engagement is already public knowledge," he observed, keeping one arm around her waist as they turned toward the kitchen door, where Daniel stood grinning broadly despite his earlier protective concerns. "Silver and gossip," Kendra quoted with a laugh. "The two commodities that flow most freely in Redstone Ridge." The following weeks passed in a blur of activity, as plans for both the Whistling Kettle's expansion and their autumn wedding proceeded simultaneously. Josephine threw herself into both projects with characteristic enthusiasm, transforming the modest eatery with touches of elegance that complemented, rather than overshadowed, its authentic charm. Under her guidance, new curtains, better lighting, and more comfortable seating enhanced the dining experience without sacrificing the unpretentious atmosphere that had made the establishment beloved among locals. Bradley, meanwhile, found himself increasingly involved in community matters beyond the mine's operations. His regular presence at the Whistling Kettle, his willingness to listen to townspeople's concerns without the former distance of his position, and his genuine interest in Redstone Ridge's development gradually shifted perceptions of the Morgan heir from aloof mine owner to engaged community member. Even his relationship with Daniel improved markedly once Kendra's brother recognized that Bradley truly valued the Whistling Kettle's legacy and had no intention of pushing Kendra to abandon her parents' establishment in favor of life solely as Mrs. Bradley Morgan. Instead, the planned expansion would allow her to continue what she loved while incorporating elements of Bradley's world. Fine wines previously unavailable in Redstone Ridge, occasionally more sophisticated dishes alongside the hearty fare that had built the eatery's reputation, and a private dining room for special occasions or business meetings. On a warm August evening, some 3 months after Bradley's proposal, the couple stood in the newly completed kitchen of the expanded Whistling Kettle. The restaurant was closed for the night, the last of the construction workers having departed hours earlier, leaving them alone in the space that represented the successful merging of their separate worlds. "What do you think?" Bradley asked, watching Kendra's expression as she explored the gleaming new equipment. A proper range with 6 burners, a specialized baking oven, the pastry preparation area she had requested, and ample storage for supplies and equipment. "It's magnificent," she said, running her fingers over the polished work surfaces with evident pleasure. "Far better than I could have imagined when we first discussed the expansion." She turned to him with a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Though I must admit, I'm still more comfortable with a simple cast iron skillet than some of these fancy contraptions." "Then perhaps we should test your skills," Bradley suggested, removing his jacket and rolling up his sleeves with deliberate intent. "I believe I was promised apple dumplings when the new kitchen was completed." "Were you indeed?" Kendra raised an eyebrow, though her smile betrayed her pleasure at his willingness to share her domain. "And do you intend merely to observe, or will you assist in their preparation?" "I recall a certain bread-making lesson in another kitchen," Bradley reminded her, moving to wash his hands at the new pump sink. Another improvement over the previous arrangement, one that suggested I might not be entirely useless in culinary matters. "High praise from Bradley Morgan," Kendra teased, already reaching for aprons, one for herself and a larger one for him. "Very well. Apples need peeling, dough needs rolling, and spices need measuring. Think you can manage such demanding tasks, Mr. Morgan?" "Under your expert guidance, I believe I can," Bradley replied, accepting the apron with mock solemnity. "Though I warn you, my skills are better suited to silver extraction than pastry preparation." For the next hour, they worked side by side in the new kitchen, their movements falling into natural synchronicity despite the difference in their experience levels. Bradley peeled apples with careful concentration, following Kendra's instructions regarding size and consistency. She prepared the dough with practiced ease, explaining each step in the same clear, patient manner that had made her an excellent teacher during their midnight conversations in his kitchen. As they worked, they discussed plans for the restaurant's grand reopening the following week, ideas for the autumn wedding Josephine was eagerly organizing, and Bradley's latest meeting with the town council regarding improvements to Redstone Ridge's water supply system. The conversation flowed effortlessly between personal matters and community concerns, domestic details and business considerations, a seamless integration of their once separate spheres. When the dumplings were finally assembled and placed in the oven, Bradley drew Kendra into his arms, ignoring the flour that dusted her apron and the apple peels still littering the work table. Such minor disarray would have disturbed him once, when order and control had been his refuge against emotional uncertainty. Now, he found unexpected beauty in the evidence of shared effort and collaborative creation. "Happy?" he asked, studying her face in the warm lamplight. "Completely," Kendra replied without hesitation, her arms settling around his waist with comfortable familiarity. Though I still occasionally wonder what your Boston connections will think when they learn you've married a frontier cook with no social pedigree or formal training. They'll think I'm the most fortunate man in Boston society, Bradley replied, brushing a streak of flour from her cheek with tender amusement. To have found a wife of genuine accomplishment rather than merely inherited position. Besides, he added with newfound perspective, their opinion matters far less to me than it once did. Martha would be shocked to hear you say so, Kendra observed, though without her former wariness when mentioning his elder sister. Martha, interestingly enough, wrote last week suggesting we consider a visit to Boston next spring as a couple, Bradley informed her, enjoying her surprise. She believes, and I quote, Bradley's frontier wife might do wonders to shake Boston society from its complacent rigidity. Kendra laughed, the sound echoing pleasantly in the new kitchen. Martha Morgan, social revolutionary. Who would have imagined it? Who indeed, Bradley agreed, marveling at how completely his once rigid sister had reassessed her priorities since Edward's departure. Though I believe we might postpone any Boston visits until we've properly established ourselves here in Redstone Ridge. The mine's expansion, the restaurant's reopening, our new home construction, all take precedence over social introductions, I think. A wise decision, Mr. Morgan, Kendra approved, rising on tiptoe to press a gentle kiss to his jaw. Though I admit, I'm rather curious to see these Boston drawing rooms I've heard so much about. They pale in comparison to the Whistling Kettle on Saturday nights, Bradley assured her, returning her kiss with one placed deliberately on her lips. All formal pretense and tedious conversation, with none of the genuine connection you've created here. Their discussion might have continued in this pleasant vein had the oven timer not chimed, announcing the dumplings' completion. Kendra reluctantly disengaged from his embrace to retrieve their creation, the rich aroma of baked apples, cinnamon, and buttery pastry filling the kitchen as she set the pan on the cooling rack. Perfect, she declared after a critical assessment. Golden brown, properly puffed, and the syrup has reduced exactly as it should. She glanced up at Bradley with a mixture of pride and affection. Your apple peeling technique has improved considerably since our first cooking lesson. I had an excellent teacher, Bradley replied, moving to stand beside her as they admired their joint creation. In more ways than cooking alone, as they shared the first dumpling, still too hot, burning their tongues but too tempting to resist. Bradley reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. From employer and employee with embellished credentials to engaged couple building a shared future. From isolated mine owner to community member. From rigid adherence to conventional expectations to recognition of what truly mattered beyond social position or proper background. Easter renewal indeed, though it had required more than one resurrection to bring them fully to this place of mutual understanding and shared purpose. Outside the Whistling Kettle's new kitchen windows, Redstone Ridge settled into evening routines. Miners returned from afternoon shifts, shopkeepers closed their establishments, families gathered for supper in homes both grand and modest. The community Bradley had once observed from the isolated remove of his hillside mansion now included him in its daily rhythms and celebrations, its challenges and triumphs, its essential humanity. All because a determined cook with a legacy to preserve had entered his household under false pretenses but with genuine heart. All because he had eventually recognized that honesty came in many forms, not all of them contained in flawless credentials or perfect backgrounds. What are you thinking? Kendra asked, noting his abstraction as she served him a proper portion of their creation. That sometimes the most valuable silver isn't found in the deepest mine shafts, Bradley replied, accepting the plate with a smile that reached his eyes. Sometimes it's found in unexpected places, like a modest eatery on the east side of town, run by a woman with more genuine worth than all the Boston debutantes combined. Kendra's blush at his words was as becoming as it had been the first time he complimented her cooking, but her response held the confidence of a woman secure in her place and her worth. Then I'd say you've made a most profitable discovery, Mr. Morgan. The most valuable of my life, Bradley agreed, raising his fork in a toast to their shared creation. The apple dumplings, yes, but more importantly, the future they were building together that transcended the boundaries of their different beginnings. As twilight deepened outside the Whistling Kettle's windows, they finished their dessert and began cleaning the kitchen together, Bradley washing dishes, while Kendra dried and arranged them in their proper places. The simple domestic task, performed without servants or ceremony, symbolized the fundamental shift in Bradley's priorities since Kendra had entered his life. Once, he had measured success by the Morgan Mines production figures, by the respect of Boston investors, by his ability to prove his father's vision correct, despite the doubters. Now, success took on new dimensions. The genuine smile that lit Kendra's eyes when he entered a room, the growing acceptance of Redstone Ridge townsfolk when he joined their gatherings, the satisfaction of contributing to a community rather than merely extracting wealth from it. "The restaurant reopening next week will be quite an event," Kendra observed as she folded her apron and hung it on its designated hook. "Josephine has invited half the county, it seems." "My sister never does anything by halves," Bradley agreed, drying his hands on a kitchen towel. "Though in this case, I believe her enthusiasm is warranted. The Whistling Kettle's expansion represents something important for Redstone Ridge. A business with genuine roots in the community, growing without losing its essential character. Much like its owner," Kendra suggested with a teasing smile. Still Joseph Tompkins' stubborn daughter at heart, despite the fancy new kitchen and expanded dining room. "I would have it no other way," Bradley assured her, drawing her into his arms once more. "It was Kendra Tompkins I fell in love with, not some polished Eastern version that Marta might once have preferred." "And it was Bradley Morgan I fell in love with," Kendra replied softly, her hands coming to rest against his chest. "Not just the successful mine owner or Boston society heir, but the man who kneaded bread beside me in the kitchen, who valued honest work and genuine connection over social pretense." The simple declaration, delivered without artifice or calculation, filled Bradley with a contentment that no business success or social achievement had ever provided. This, he realized, was what his mother had tried to explain to him before her untimely death. That true partnership, founded on mutual respect and genuine affection, transcended the artificial barriers of class and background that Boston society held so dear. "6 weeks until our wedding," he murmured, his forehead resting gently against hers. "Think Josephine can manage to organize everything to her exacting standards in that time?" "Josephine could organize a royal coronation with 2 days' notice if properly motivated," Kendra laughed. "Though I've had to firmly reject some of her more elaborate suggestions. I draw the line at imported French lace and a 10-tier cake." "A wise boundary," Bradley agreed, grateful that Kendra's practical nature would prevent their wedding from becoming the sort of ostentatious display he had always privately disdained. "Though I confess I'm less concerned with the ceremony than with what follows." "Our life together," Kendra supplied, understanding his meaning perfectly. "The joining of our worlds in more than just name." "Exactly." Bradley's hands tightened slightly at her waist, emphasizing his next words. "The mine will always require attention, of course, but I find my priorities shifting in ways I couldn't have imagined a year ago. The restaurant's success, our involvement in community matters, the home we're building together, all seem more meaningful than simply accumulating wealth or position." Joseph Tompkins would be astonished to hear a Morgan express such sentiments, Kendra observed, though without the defensive edge that had once accompanied mentions of their father's historic antagonism. "Though I think, in time, he might have recognized the man behind the Morgan name, just as I have. As I hope your brother continues to do," Bradley added, recalling Daniel's lingering wariness despite their improved relations. "His good opinion matters to me, Kendra, not just because he's important to you, but because he represents the community I hope to be truly part of, not merely an employer within." "Daniel is coming around," Kendra assured him. "Your willingness to preserve and expand the Whistling Kettle rather than expecting me to abandon it has gone far toward convincing him of your sincerity. And your support during the water rights negotiation with the new mining operation showed him a Morgan can indeed consider community needs alongside business interests." "Progress, then," Bradley said with satisfaction, "though I imagine he'll always maintain a certain protective vigilance where his sister is concerned." "Naturally," Kendra agreed with a smile. "As will my future husband, I suspect." "Always," Bradley confirmed. sealing the promise with a kiss that began gently but deepened as Kendra responded with equal fervor. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, the kitchen's warm lamplight had taken on a golden quality that seemed to envelop them in its glow. "We should lock up," Kendra noted reluctantly, though she made no immediate move to leave his embrace. "It's growing late and your reputation would suffer irreparable damage if you were discovered alone with your fiancé after proper visiting hours." "My reputation has already undergone considerable revision since Easter," Bradley observed with wry amusement. "From aloof mine owner to community member courting the Whistling Kettle's proprietor. Quite a transformation in Redstone Ridge estimation." "A transformation many are still adjusting to," Kinder reminded him, finally stepping away to collect her shawl from its hook near the door. "Though Mrs. Peterson assured me just yesterday that she always knew you had hidden depths beneath your formal exterior." "Did she indeed?" Bradley extinguished the kitchen lamps as they moved toward the exit. "The same Mrs. Peterson who once warned Daniel that no Morgan could be trusted any farther than he could be thrown?" "The very same," Kendra confirmed as they stepped outside into the cool evening air. "People change their minds when given reason to, Bradley, even in a town as set in its ways as Redstone Ridge." Bradley secured the restaurant's back door, then offered Kendra his arm for the short walk to her brother's house, where she would continue to reside until their wedding. The night air carried the sense of pine from the surrounding mountains and cook fire smoke from nearby homes, familiar elements of the frontier town he had once viewed primarily as the setting for his mine's operations, rather than a community worthy of investment beyond employment. "6 more weeks," he said as they strolled along the boardwalk, nodding to the occasional passerby who greeted them with increasing normality as their courtship became an established fact rather than a surprising novelty. "Then you'll be stuck with a Morgan for life, poor woman." "A fate I face with remarkable equanimity," Kendra replied, her tone light though her eyes held genuine emotion when they met his. "Though I still occasionally expect to wake and find this all a dream. That I'm back in your kitchen with flour on my apron, trying to impress your sisters with my allegedly extensive cooking experience." "If it's a dream, then we're sharing it," Bradley assured her, covering her hand where it rested on his arm. "And I, for one, have no desire to wake." Their steps slowed as they approached Daniel's modest house, where a lamp burned in the front window. Kendra's brother maintaining his vigilant watch despite Bradley's now established position as her fiancé. Some things changed more slowly than others in Redstone Ridge. "Until tomorrow, then," Bradley said, raising her hand to his lips in the formal gesture that had become their nightly ritual, respecting propriety while conveying deeper feelings through the lingering warmth of his touch. "Until tomorrow," Kendra echoed, her voice holding the promise of all the tomorrows stretching before them. Days of shared purpose and mutual understanding, of bridged differences and celebrated commonalities, of a partnership neither could have imagined when she first entered his household under false pretenses, but with a genuine heart that had ultimately revealed the truth that mattered most. As she disappeared into her brother's house and Bradley turned toward his waiting horse, the stars emerged above Redstone Ridge like silver flecks against the velvet darkness. A fitting canopy for a town built on silver ore, but sustained by something far more valuable: the genuine connections between people who recognized worth beyond surface appearance or social position. Bradley Morgan, once focused solely on proving his father's vision correct through the mine's success, now found himself anticipating a different sort of legacy. One built with Kendra Tompkins at his side, combining the best elements of their separate worlds into something neither of their fathers could have imagined, but both might ultimately have approved. Easter renewal indeed, though the blossoms had long since given way to summer's fullness and would soon transition to autumn's harvest. The lesson of resurrection and new beginnings, it seemed, applied in all seasons, when one remained open to unexpected possibilities and genuine connection beyond conventional expectations. With that thought accompanying him, Bradley mounted his stallion and turned toward home. Not the isolated mansion on the hill, but the shared future taking shape with every passing day, every small compromise, every moment of understanding between himself and the woman who had entered his life under false pretenses, but revealed truths he might otherwise never have recognized.